Chapter 369. The surroundings were completely silent. Many people had not expected Nanshan to have reached the Origin Realm. It should be pointed out that in the Dao Yi Academy, some of the instructors were only at the Origin Realm, and the instructors of the Outer Court were only at the Void-Piercing Realm. Yet Nanshan had reached the Origin Realm at such a young age. It had to be said that his talent could only be described as terrifying. Soon everyone turned to look at Zhou Xian. Nanshan had already revealed his trump card. What about Zhou Xian's? On the life and death pillar, Zhou Xian smiled. You've already revealed your trump card. What, you don't want to waste time? Nanshan smiled. Indeed, I don't want to waste time. Zhou Xian, after I deal with you, I will return to the Firmament World and form the Realm Defense Alliance. At that time, I will completely destroy the Firmament Sword Sect. Unfortunately, you won't live to see that day. With that, he raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. Crack. The space where his fist was clenched directly cracked. Nanshan's expression became a little ferocious. He flashed forward and directly appeared in front of Zhou Xian. Then he threw a punch at Zhou Xian. As soon as the punch was thrown, the life and death pillar beneath their feet instantly cracked. At the same time, the space around Zhou Xian also cracked. Strands of dark matter energy seeped out from the spatial cracks around Zhou Xian and swallowed towards Zhou Xian. The power of a single punch was terrifying. In front of Nanshan, Zhou Xian opened his right hand. The space around him trembled slightly. Then a spatial sword instantly condensed. At the same time, the spatial cracks around Zhou Xian were instantly repaired. Seeing this scene, the faces of the Grand Elder and the rest changed. This is... The Origin Master stared at Zhou Xian. How can he repair space? Impossible. The Grand Elder also stared at Zhou Xian. No one knew what he was thinking. After the spatial sword condensed, the two-sword intense suddenly surged into the spatial sword. The next moment Zhou Xian stabbed out. One sword to determine life and death. When the sword stabbed out, boom. In front of everyone's eyes, the life and death pillar at the foot of Zhou Xian and Nanshan, which had already been broken into pieces, instantly turned into dust. At the same time, the two of them frantically retreated. While Zhou Xian was retreating, 5 flying swords suddenly flew out from the sword box behind him. Like 5 lightning bolts, they instantly appeared in front of Nanshan. Nanshan's pupils constricted slightly when he saw the 5 flying swords. He suddenly slapped his hands behind him and the powerful force caused him to forcefully stop. Subsequently, he pressed his hands together, stomped his right foot down and spread his hands apart. Defend. With that, a black round shield appeared in front of him. Bam bam bam. Zhou Xian's 5 flying swords were forcibly blocked by this round shield, but in the next moment, Zhou Xian suddenly appeared in front of him and then a sword slashed straight at him. Boom. The round shield instantly shattered and Nanshan retreated rapidly. However, before he could take a few steps back, several swords suddenly flashed out from the space around him. Space sword. Seeing this scene, Nanshan's expression changed greatly. At this moment he didn't dare to hold back and he slapped his hands towards his waist. Zhang destruction. Boom. The space within Nanshan's Zhang collapsed in an instant, and everything shattered along with Zhou Xian's swords. Soon the space returned to normal, and at this moment, Nanshan's face was incomparably pale without a trace of blood. But Zhou Xian had already appeared in front of him. Just at this moment an old man suddenly appeared in front of Nanshan. Great Elder. Zhou Xian stopped and smiled slightly. Great Elder, what do you mean by this? The Great Elder said softly, you win. Zhou Xian said with a smile. He said that I won't be there if he dies and he dies if I die. The Great Elder looked at Zhou Xian. Give the old man some face and spare his life, how about it? Zhou Xian thought for a moment and then said, he will take revenge on me in the future. The Great Elder said, he won't. If he dares to act against you, then the old man will definitely take his life. As soon as he finished speaking, he just looked at Zhou Xian and waited for Zhou Xian's answer. Zhou Xian smiled. I will definitely give face to the Great Elder. However, his spatial rings belong to me. The Great Elder turned to look at Nanshan. Nanshan fell silent for a moment before he tapped with his finger, and the 2 spatial rings on him flew over to Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian frowned slightly when he saw this. This fellow is quite sensible. He actually didn't resist at all. He didn't think too much about it and he glanced at the 2 spatial rings. There were over 300,000 violet origin crystals within them. Besides that, there were 9 heaven-ranked treasures and some miscellaneous items. Xian put the spatial rings away and then he looked at the Great Elder and smiled. Great Elder, I'll be leaving first. The Great Elder hesitated for a moment, and then he tapped with his finger and a spatial ring fell in front of Xian. Xian glanced at it and there were 2 high-grade heaven-rank swords within it. Xian was stunned. The Great Elder said, "The old man doesn't use swords, so these swords should be of some use to you." Xian knew that the Great Elder had done this because he had let Nanshan go. He didn't stand on ceremony and he picked up the swords with a smile. "Thank you, Great Elder." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Nearby, Xiaogu Lichuan and the others hurriedly rushed over. Xian smiled. "Come on, let's go celebrate." Xiaogu and the others laughed, and it didn't take long for Xian and the others to vanish into the distance. On the other hand, Bai Ling and the others behind Nanshan had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. The Great Elder turned to look at Nanshan, who had remained silent. "Are you unwilling?" Nanshan didn't speak. The Great Elder said softly, "You have just reached the origin realm and you haven't even grasped the slightest bit of source power, and your most lethal move was the last Zhang annihilation you used to protect yourself. It's just that you didn't expect that you would be forced to use this trump card to protect yourself." Nanshan said softly, "I'm a little unwilling." The Great Elder shook his head. "Look at him from another angle, maybe you'll be willing. That sword skill of his is no weaker than your Zhang annihilation, and his sword is very strange. In the last move that defeated you, he was able to silently integrate those swords into the space, and then use the power of space to activate these swords. Can be said that his use of the power of space is even stronger than some void-piercing realm powerhouses." As he spoke, he looked at Nanshan. "Other than that, he didn't use his trump card, right?" Hearing this, Nanshan's expression suddenly changed slightly. Did Xian use his full strength? If he asked himself, he shouldn't have. The Great Elder said again, "Nanshan, within 3 years, you can't find trouble with him. If you do, the old man will take your life, and after 3 years, it may be 2 extremes, either you don't find trouble with him, or you don't dare to find trouble with him. And before that, you can't find him without permission." As he finished speaking, he turned and left. In the same place, Nanshan was silent. And next to him, Source also walked over. He whispered, "If you truly control source power, you may be able to defeat him, but before that you still can't. This person's sword skills, even I have to be careful. If you find him privately, you will die without a doubt." As he finished speaking, he turned and left. After a moment of silence, Nanshan turned and left. Inside Xian's house, Xian, Lichuan and Guqiu sat around the table. During the meal, Xiaogu sighed. The Great Elder suddenly intervened. "It's really unfair." Xian smiled slightly, not saying anything. Xiaogu looked at Xian. "Brother Yi, you're not angry?" Xian smiled. "Angry about what?" Xiaogu said in a low voice. "Endless trouble." Xian smiled. "If I can defeat him once, I can defeat him a second time." Actually, he also wanted to kill Nanshan to eliminate any future troubles. But he was very clear, if he really did that, it was equivalent to slapping the Great Elder's face in front of everyone. And if he really did not give the Great Elder any face and wanted to kill Nanshan, the Great Elder would definitely intervene. At that time, his situation would become terrible. On the contrary, if he let Nanshan live, he would obtain many benefits. And as for this future trouble, as he said, if Xian was strong enough, he could kill Nanshan once, he could kill him 100 times, 1,000 times. As if thinking of something, Xian suddenly stood up. "To the Purple Flame Pagoda." Purple Flame Pagoda? Xiaogu and the others looked at Xian. "For what?" "Cultivation." Xian smiled. "To take over Nanshan's territory. From now on, Nanshan's territory is ours." Hearing this, everyone was stunned, then overjoyed. It should be known that Nanshan occupied a better area in the 3rd floor. If they could get Nanshan's territory, then they would be able to cultivate better in the future. Soon Xian led everyone to the Purple Flame Pagoda. After entering the Purple Flame Pagoda, Xian immediately felt an abundant spiritual energy. This spiritual energy was a little hot, a little overbearing. Xian brought Xiaogu and the others to Nanshan's territory, but at this moment, Nanshan was no longer there. When Bai Ling and the others saw Xian and the others, their faces changed. Xian said with a smile, "Guys, this place is mine now." Bai Ling and the others' faces were a little ugly, but no one dared to resist. Soon Bai Ling and the others turned and left. At this time Xiaogu smiled. If I can cultivate here every day at most 3 years, I can also reach the origin realm. Confidence. Xiao Ji's words were full of confidence. Yi Xian glanced at the people around him. These were all geniuses. Their future achievements will certainly not be low. Thinking of this, an idea suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's mind. He turned to look at Xiaogu. Brother Xiao, how many inner court students do you know? Xiaogu looked at Yi Xian. You want to gather these people? Yi Xian nodded. Can I? Xiaogu thought for a moment, then nodded. Of course you can. Because every once in a while the academy will give us a mission, and at that time if we have more people it will be very advantageous. Moreover, in this inner court, we will not be bullied by others with more people. Yi Xian said with a smile. This area should be able to accommodate a lot of people. Help me contact people. See if there is anyone who is willing to join us. Of course, those with bad moral character will not be accepted. Xiaogu said with a smile. Okay. Saying this, he seemed to think of something and asked, since you want to form a group, then think of a name. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, let's call it Xiumen. In this world only I am outstanding. Chapter 370. Xiumen. In fact, it could be said that Yi Xian had founded the Xiumen on a whim. After seeing Xiaogu and the others around him, Yi Xian knew that they were different from the students of Dao Yi Academy. It was difficult for the students of Dao Yi Academy to keep up with his pace, but Xiaogu and the others were different. These people were truly monstrous. Their future achievements might not be lower than Yi Xian's. There was definitely no harm in making more friends in the outside world. Yi Xian now controlled Nanshan's territory. Coupled with the fact that he had defeated Nanshan, his reputation in the inner courtyard could be said to be very high. In the inner courtyard, if these geniuses wanted to follow you willingly, they had to meet 2 criteria. The first was strength and the second was benefits. Yi Xian met both criteria, so Xiaogu pulled in a few more people. Now Yi Xian's Xiumen had a total of 9 members. The weakest was at the void-piercing realm, except for Yi Xian. In the stone cave, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on a praying mat. Around him was extremely dense purple fire energy. This energy was indeed much better than ordinary spiritual energy. At this moment he also knew why so many people wanted to enter the inner courtyard of Dao Yi Academy. Because cultivating in here was indeed several times faster than cultivating in the outside world. This also made Yi Xian want to break through to the void-piercing realm. His previous battle with Nanshan had been very taxing for him. If he had not used the Sword of Space, he would not have been able to defeat Nanshan at all. An expert at Nanshan's realm could easily destroy his heaven-grade sword. Moreover, Nanshan had clearly just reached the origin realm. Otherwise, even if he used the Sword of Space, it would be difficult for him to defeat his opponent. The difference in realm. His biggest problem now was that his realm was too low. To break through to the void-piercing realm, just the energy in the purple flame pagoda was not enough. He still needed swords. Moreover, they needed heaven-grade swords and the number could not be small. Yi Xian checked his current financial situation. He now had a total of 9 heaven-grade swords and about 1.6 million purple source crystals. A high-grade heaven-tier sword was worth around 30,000 purple origin crystals. In other words, with his current wealth he could buy dozens of swords. But his intuition told him that it might not be enough. As his realm increased, his demand for swords became higher and higher, both in terms of quantity and quality. This made him very distressed. Now every time he broke through, it meant that he needed a huge amount of wealth. Poor. At the thought of breaking through to the void-piercing realm, Yi Xian felt extremely poor. Make money. He had to make money. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian found Xiaogu and asked, "You told me before that there are purple fire crystals in this purple fire pagoda?" Xiaogu nodded. Under the violet flame pagoda, there is a passage called the Violet Flame Path. In the depths of the Violet Flame Path, there are violet fire crystals, but it is very dangerous. Dangerous? Yi Xian asked. How dangerous? Xiaogu said in a deep voice, there is fire poison in the purple flame path. The deeper you go, the stronger the fire poison. This fire poison is too overbearing. Even people like us can only last for a quarter of an hour. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then asked, are these violet fire crystals very precious? Xiaogu smiled bitterly. Very precious. If it is exchanged for violet origin crystals, It can be said that one violet fire crystal can be exchanged for 100 violet origin crystals. This is because the violet fire crystal contains a lot of energy, several times that of ordinary violet origin crystals. Xian thought for a moment, then said, I want to go to the violet flame path. Xiaogu was taken aback. You want violet fire crystals? Xian nodded. I'm a little tight on money. This chapter is not over, please turn the page, Xiaogu said in a deep voice. That place is really dangerous. Even the Great Elder and the others cannot infiltrate. Xian smiled. Don't worry, if I can't hold on I will retreat. I will not risk my life. Xiaogu nodded. Then be careful. Xian nodded slightly, then followed Xiaogu to the violet flame path. After arriving at the entrance of the violet flame path, Xiaogu turned and left. Xian glanced at the violet flame path, which was bright red and bottomless. Xian was a little hesitant because he felt a heat wave at the entrance, and there was a trace of something else in this heat wave that made him very uncomfortable. He knew that this should be the fire poison. After a moment of silence, Xian walked in. At the same time his sword intent began to spread out, which began to protect his surroundings. With this sword intent the fire poison was immediately blocked. Seeing this scene, Xian was delighted. His sword intent could really block the fire poison. Xian quickened his pace. After walking for about half an hour, Xian's expression gradually turned serious, because he found that the fire poison was getting stronger and stronger as he went down. It was so strong that his sword intent was almost unable to withstand it. However, he could still persevere. Xian continued to walk down and soon he found some violet fire crystals in the surrounding passageways. These violet fire crystals were the size of a fist, completely red as if there were flames burning, and contained an extremely pure energy. Unfortunately there were not many of them, only a dozen or so. Phew. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. Xian put it away and continued to walk down the violet flame path as if there was no end. After another hour, Xian stopped because at this moment, the sword intent around him had actually begun to corrode. I can't continue. He really wanted to continue because the deeper he went the more violet fire crystals there were. Until now he had already obtained nearly 1,000 violet fire crystals. However, he was very clear that he couldn't continue because if he did, the fire poison would enter his body, and then he would be in big trouble. Fire poison? Xian suddenly froze. Fire poison? Didn't he have the chaotic energy? At this moment Xian thought of the chaotic energy. Xian hesitated for a moment on the spot and then he opened his palm. A strand of chaotic energy appeared at the center of his palm. As soon as this strand of chaotic energy appeared, the fire poison around him actually retreated swiftly, and it wasn't long before all the fire poison around him had vanished. Xian was overjoyed when he saw this. The chaotic energy was really the bane of the poison. With the chaotic energy, Xian no longer had any worries and continued to walk down. This time he sped up and at the same time he removed the violet fire crystals on the walls on both sides of the violet flame path. I've made a killing. Xian's speed grew faster and faster. Around 2 hours later he had already collected over 3,000 violet fire crystals, which was equivalent to 300,000 violet genesis crystals. The further down he went the more violet fire crystals there were. Therefore Xian continued to walk down. Around half an hour later Xian, who was collecting violet fire crystals, suddenly stopped. He lifted his head and saw a man in white standing nearby. The man was around 20 years old and wore a white robe. At his waist was a sheathed saber. The man in white held the saber hilt in his left hand as he stood there silently. Xian noticed that the man in white was resisting the fire poison. Saber gleam. There was a thin barrier around the man in white. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. The thin saber gleam was blocking the fire poison in the surroundings. Xian's expression turned solemn when he saw this. The man was using the fire poison to cultivate. Most importantly, the man was able to rely on the saber gleam to reach this point. How powerful! At this moment the man in white suddenly turned to look at Xian. When he saw Xian he was slightly taken aback and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. You are. Xian smiled. Xian. The man in white shook his head. Never heard of you. Xian smiled. I just entered the inner court. The man in white nodded slightly and looked at Xian. How did you get here? Xian opened his palm and a sword appeared in it. Swordsman? The man in white asked. Xian nodded. Swordsman. After saying that, he continued to walk forward in a very relaxed manner. The man in white was stunned when he saw this. Soon his expression turned solemn. Brother Yi, why are you walking so easily? Aren't you afraid of the fire poison? Xian stopped and smiled. It's just fire poison. What's there to be afraid of? You still need to work hard. The man in white said, Brother Ye's strength. I admire you. Xian smiled. What's your name? The man in white said, Ming Kuan. Xian said, Brother Ming Kuan, I'll be leaving first. After saying that, he continued to walk forward. Ming Kuan's expression became extremely solemn as he watched Xian disappear into the distance. So powerful. As he said that, his gaze gradually became determined. Then he continued to walk forward but very slowly. In the distance, Xian walked as he collected violet fire crystals. The further he went, the more fire poison there was and the more terrifying it became. It was so terrifying that even Xian felt fearful. If it were not for the chaotic qi, the fire poison would have taken his life in an instant. Let alone him, even Origin Realm experts would probably be killed instantly if they inhaled a single breath of the air. Xian thought about it and continued to walk forward. There were a lot of violet fire crystals and they were of very good quality. Although there was chaotic energy, Xian still did not dare to be careless, because the deeper he went, the more he felt that this place was not simple. Perhaps even the Grand Elder and the others in the academy had not gone so deep. Roughly an hour later, Xian stopped. There was a whirlpool not far away from him. The whirlpool was filled with magma that was bubbling. He even saw some violet fire crystals in the whirlpool. They were as big as watermelons. Xian said, God on the second floor, is there any danger in there? The god on the second floor said indifferently, won't you know if you try? Xian's face darkened. What was he talking about? Go and try. What if it's gone? After that, no matter what he asked, the god on the second floor did not respond. In the end, Xian had no choice but to rely on himself. He walked over. As soon as he walked over, the whirlpool suddenly trembled violently. Then a powerful force directly swept Xian in. At this moment, Xiao Linger's voice suddenly rang in Xian's head. Danger. Couldn't you have said it earlier? This was Xian's final cry. You didn't ask me either. P.S. If you have a ticket, keep it for now. I'll give you a ticket when I explode. End of this chapter. Chapter 371. After an unknown period of time, Xian felt as if his head was filled with lead. Extremely heavy. As if he had thought of something, he suddenly sat up. At this moment he was in a pool of magma and there was a thin blue light around him. It was this blue light that blocked the magma around him. The god on the second floor had made a move. At this moment the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly sounded. Be careful, this place is not simple. Xian asked, where is this? The god on the second floor said, there is an unknown existence in the depths of this purple flame pagoda. Be careful. Unknown existence. Xian frowned slightly and was about to speak, but at this moment, there was a sudden tremor not far from him. Hide. The god on the second floor suddenly said. Hearing this, Xian hurriedly used the chaotic qi to hide himself. Soon Xian saw the two men on fire not far away from him. The two men on fire glanced around and found nothing. Soon the two men on fire turned around and left. Xian said in a low voice, what is that? The god on the second floor said, Fire Spirit Man, a spiritual creature born from magma. Can only survive in magma. Xian glanced into the distance. He thought about it and finally decided not to continue forward. Although he wanted to take a look, his intuition told him that it was very dangerous ahead. It was better not to go. Curiosity killed people. Just as Xian was about to leave, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind, Go over. It was not the voice of the god on the second floor. It was the voice of the mysterious person on the fourth floor. Why? Xian asked. The mysterious person said, Dao Law. Dao Law. Xian fell silent. He knew that there were only two ways for those imprisoned in the pagoda to come out. The first was to shatter the seal and the second was to find the Dao Law and unlock the seal. The mysterious person on the fourth floor had always hoped that he would die. That way she would be able to come out directly if the prison pagoda collapsed. Now she obviously wanted to take the second path. Yi Xian shook his head. It's dangerous. The mysterious man said indifferently, if you go, I'll help you condense the second Dao Law sword. Yi Xian said solemnly, I can look for Guru on the second floor. The mysterious person said, although she is at a critical moment right now. She won't ruin her plan for you. Yi Xian was silent. The mysterious man continued, other than that, I can also help your master reconstruct his physical body. Hearing this, Yi Xian was a little tempted. Reconstruct Yu Qi's body. Meanwhile, the mysterious man continued, it'll be beneficial to you if you find the Dao laws. Of course you can forget about it if you're really unwilling. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I don't dare guarantee that I'll definitely be able to obtain the 4th level of the Dao laws. The mysterious person said, if you try your best even if you can't get it now, I will still fulfill the conditions I promised you. Yi Xian nodded. Alright, I'll try my best. After that he slowly snuck into the distance. Yi Xian was extremely vigilant towards this unknown place, especially since there were Dao laws here. According to his past experience, places with Dao laws weren't good places. As he walked, Yi Xian was suddenly stunned because he noticed that there were numerous violet fire crystals in the magma. These violet fire crystals were huge and the energy they contained was extremely shocking. Yi Xian was overjoyed. He hurriedly put the violet fire crystals away. Just like that, it didn't take long for him to collect nearly 10,000 violet origin crystals. If they were converted into violet origin crystals, it would be 1 million. Not long after, Yi Xian suddenly stopped because he saw a city in the magma not far away. A city that was situated in the magma. Yi Xian snuck over silently and arrived before the city gate. There were 3 words above the gate. Skyfire City. Skyfire City? Yi Xian was silent for a while before he entered the city. The city was very deserted, with only occasional flaming figures floating around. Yi Xian cautiously moved forward. Soon he arrived in front of a palace. In front of the palace, there were 2 flaming figures quietly guarding it. The strength of these 2 flaming figures was at the void-piercing realm. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he quietly snuck into the palace. The palace was empty, very spacious. Yi Xian looked not far away and saw a woman sitting there. The woman was about 16 or 17 years old and wore a dress that seemed to be condensed from flames. She sat there quietly with her eyes closed and there was not the slightest bit of aura coming from her. Upon closer inspection, Yi Xian found that the woman was very beautiful. She had curved eyebrows, exquisite facial features and a tall jade nose. The beauty of the woman in front of him did not lose to any woman he had seen before. Yi Xian walked in front of the woman. The woman's hair seemed to be condensed from flames and was very breathtaking. Yi Xian said in a low voice in his heart, the guy on the 4th floor. The Dao Law is on her. The mysterious man on the 4th floor suddenly said. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, it's with her. The mysterious man said, kill her and you can obtain the Dao Law. Kill her? Yi Xian looked at the woman in front of him and frowned. The mysterious man on the 4th floor suddenly said, what are you hesitating for? Yi Xian shook his head, not killing her. Why? The mysterious man asked. Yi Xian said indifferently, I have no enmity with her. Why should I kill her? The mysterious man chuckled with a hint of sarcasm in his laughter. What, you want to be a good person now? Yi Xian shook his head, it's not that I want to be a good person. It's just that I have no enmity with her. Why should I kill her? The mysterious woman smiled and said, the weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of this world. Yi Xian nodded, you're right. However, I still can't do it. Yi Xian had never thought of himself as a good person. However, Yi Xian always had his own bottom line. He would never cross that bottom line. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman said, the Dao Law is on her. If you don't kill her, how will you obtain the Dao Law? If you don't obtain the Dao Law, how will you become stronger? If you don't obtain the Dao Law, how will you save your master Yu Qi? Yi Xian fell silent when he heard that. He would be able to obtain the Dao Law if he killed the woman before him. Obtaining the Dao Law meant that he would be able to condense a second Dao Law and reconstruct Yu Qi's body. However, he really couldn't kill her just like that. After a short while, Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and smiled, killing a person and obtaining countless benefits. However, I can't feel at ease. I won't do it. As soon as he finished speaking, he took 2 steps back. However, at this moment, A sword howl suddenly resounded from within his body. It was the sword at the center of the pagoda. The sword trembled, and then a ray of light suddenly flashed out from within it and entered Yi Xian's body. As soon as this ray of light entered his body, Yi Xian's body trembled violently. In the next moment, a powerful strand of sword qi instantly spread throughout his entire body. At the same time, the scene before his eyes suddenly changed. At this moment he was in a boundless gray world. Yi Xian raised his head and looked over. There was a blurry figure standing high in the sky not too far away from him. The figure's back was facing him, so he couldn't see its true appearance clearly. Moreover, there was a similarly blurry little fellow sitting on the figure's shoulder, and the little fellow's head was resting on the figure's head. Yi Xian was just about to speak when a voice suddenly resounded from the horizon. A man must repay kindness and take revenge for enmity. If there's enmity, then so what if I annihilate the entire universe? However, one must never forget one's original intentions and go against one's heart. Since you're able to stick to your heart and gain the acknowledgement of my sword, then that's fate. As he spoke, the figure suddenly waved his right hand lightly, and a ray of light descended from the sky. It didn't take long for the ray of light to enter the space between Yi Xian's brows. In next to no time, strands of information surged into Yi Xian's mind like tidewater. At the same time, the voice resounded once more. I learned this sword technique when I was young, and it's been with me ever since. However, it's slightly lacking now, so I've improved it slightly. Remember, this sword technique follows one's heart. If one's thoughts go against one's will, then draw the sword and slash the heavens and the earth. If I draw my sword, then even the heavens can slash it. As soon as the voice resounded, the figure gradually became illusory. Below, Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly asked, "Senior Yu?" At this moment the figure had completely vanished. At the same time, the scene before Yi Xian's eyes warped, and it didn't take long for him to return to the hall. At this moment, a sword technique had appeared in his mind. At this moment, the mysterious woman on the 4th floor suddenly sighed softly. Did you save this universe in your previous life? Or did you save some peerless almighty? Why do you have such dog*t luck? Yi Xian, the mysterious woman on the 4th floor said again, are you sure you don't want this Dao law? Yi Xian smiled, and just as he was about to speak, the flaming woman in front of him suddenly opened her eyes. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly retreated. In his heart he asked, this fellow actually woke up? The mysterious woman on the 4th floor didn't speak. At this moment the god on the 2nd floor suddenly said, she's always been awake. Yi Xian's face darkened. 4th floor, why didn't you tell me? The 4th floor didn't speak. At this moment Yi Xian knew. This fellow on the 4th floor didn't have good intentions at all. If he really made a move, he would probably be dead by now. And the other party wanted to use the flaming woman in front of him to take his life. This mysterious woman on the 4th floor was really King Evil. Yi Xian and the flaming woman pulled a large distance apart, and the flaming woman just looked at him without saying a word. However, Yi Xian sensed a formless oppressive force. Strong, really strong. This fellow in front of him was definitely not someone he could fight against now. But fortunately, the other party didn't directly make a move. The flaming woman just looked at Yi Xian calmly. Why didn't you listen to her and directly make a move against me? Hearing this, Yi Xian was instantly stunned. What the hell? How did this fellow know about my conversation with the mysterious woman on the 4th floor? The other party knew about the prison pagoda? Thinking of this, Yi Xian instantly broke out in a cold sweat. Who the hell was this fellow? The flaming woman stared at Yi Xian. Answer me. Yi Xian forced himself to calm down. He said in a deep voice, as I said earlier, I have no enmity with you and I don't want to kill you. The flaming woman stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Meanwhile, Yi Xian hurriedly asked in his heart, God on the 2nd floor, how did she know what I said to the bad woman on the 4th floor? After a moment of silence, the god on the 2nd floor said, she should be that Dao law. There was a solemn tone in his voice. Yi Xian. Chapter 372. Dao Law. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment, the flaming lady in front of him suddenly looked at Yi Xian. After a while, she frowned slightly. Yi Xian hesitated for a while and asked softly, what's wrong? The flaming lady said calmly, logically speaking, this tower will not choose you. Although your talent is not bad, you are not worthy of this tower. Only those who possess the karmic luck of the world can obtain the acknowledgement of this pagoda. At this moment, the mysterious woman on the 4th floor suddenly chuckled and said, "Do you think this tower is interested in him? It is just trying to ride on someone's coattails." Xian's face darkened. The coattails this bad woman was talking about must be the woman in the plain dress. The flaming lady looked at Xian's abdomen for a long time. In the end, she frowned slightly and said, "This tower's seal should have been broken long ago. Someone strengthened the tower's seal. Was it her?" The mysterious woman on the 4th floor said calmly, "Who else could it be?" The flaming lady glanced at Xian and fell silent. At this moment, the mysterious woman on the 4th floor suddenly said, "Xianxia, as the supreme Tao law of heaven and earth, you have been trapped in this tower with us for nearly 10,000 years. Now there is a great opportunity to change your fate in front of you. If you do not seize it, you will regret it in the future." The flaming lady said calmly, "Kill him? Take over the tower?" Xian was speechless. The mysterious woman on the 4th floor said, "Of course. This person is so weak, how can he deserve such a treasure? If you kill him, you can get the treasure easily." Xian's face was extremely dark. This woman was not just a normal kind of bad. The flaming lady suddenly chuckled and said, "Jian Zizai, you have a good heart. If I kill him, the tower seal will be broken and you can come out, right?" Jian Zizai? Xian nodded slightly. So this woman was called Jian Zizai. It should be Jian Vicious. Jian Zizai smiled and said, "If you kill him, it will be beneficial for everyone, right?" Xianxia said calmly, "If I kill him, you will be free. However, I will have to bear this karma." "Your plan is very good." Jian Zizai sneered. "No matter what, you're the supreme law of heaven and earth, yet you're so timid when doing things. Can't you have some ambition?" Xianxia smiled and said, "If he really did as you said and attacked me, then I would have killed him. However, he did not make a move. Just as he said, I have no enmity with him, so why should I kill him?" Jian Zizai didn't say anything. Actually, from the moment she instigated Xian to kill, she was very clear that if Xian did not make the first move, Xianxia would not make a move against Xian. Because Xian had been acknowledged by the World Prison Pagoda from a certain perspective, he could be said to be the master of these Tao laws within the pagoda. Of course, Xian was relatively weak right now. It was impossible for him to make these Tao laws submit to him. However, these Tao laws would not actively harm him. However, if it was Xian who made the first move, then it would be a different story. What she did not expect was that Xian actually did not make a move. Even in the face of so many temptations, he did not make a move. But now it was meaningless to say anything. The 4th floor was completely silent. Outside the World Prison Pagoda, Xianxia looked at Xian. "My duty was to seal her. However, the pagoda was heavily damaged and the Tao laws were scattered. The seal was broken and I and the other Tao laws were scattered throughout the star field." At this point she paused and said, "I can't return to the pagoda for now." "Can't return to the pagoda for now?" Xian nodded. "It's okay. Whether you return or not is your freedom." As for the Tao laws within the World Prison Pagoda, Xian had never thought that they belonged to him. Xianxia glanced at Xian and nodded slightly. "You must be careful of Jian Zizai. This chapter is not over. Please continue." "It's simple." Xian nodded. "I know. She's very bad." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Why was she imprisoned in the pagoda?" Xianxia was silent. Xian softly said, "Can't you tell me?" Xianxia said, "She was too strong." "Too strong?" Xian was startled and then asked, "She was imprisoned because she was too strong?" Xianxia nodded. Xian hesitated and then said, There's nothing wrong with being too strong." Xianxia shook her head. "There's nothing wrong with being too strong. It's those people who were wrong. They wanted to enter the 5th dimension, so they were imprisoned." At this point she paused and then said, "It's just that I never expected to encounter those 3 tough people." Xian hurriedly asked, "The 3 swords at the top of the pagoda?" Xianxia nodded. Xian then asked, "Were they very strong?" Xianxia looked at Xian. "Don't ask questions that will make people doubt your intelligence." Xian. At this time, Xianxia suddenly said, "Even if their strength is heaven-defying and they almost destroyed the pagoda, they can't enter the 5th dimension." "Why?" Xian hurriedly asked. Xianxia smiled and did not speak. Yi Xian was about to speak when Xianxia suddenly said, "You should go. We'll meet again when we're free." Yi Xian nodded. As if thinking of something, he hurriedly said, "Senior, can you help me with a small matter?" Xianxia looked at Yi Xian. "What is it?" Yi Xian said, "Help my teacher reconstruct a fleshly body." As he spoke, he took out Yu Qi's soul. Xianxia looked at Yu Qi's soul. After a moment of silence, she said, "I need some things. You have to get them for me." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What things?" Xianxia said, "Soul, wood, heart, protecting lotus, sculpted spirit flower. These three are the main things." Yi Xian nodded. "I'll look for them after I leave." Xianxia said, "Leave her soul here. I'll help her nurture it first." Yi Xian said, "Okay. Then I'll have to trouble Senior." After speaking, he gave Yu Qi's soul to Xianxia and left the hall. Xianxia looked in the direction Yi Xian had left. No one knew what she was thinking. Yi Xian returned to the purple flame path. He said in a deep voice, "Great God from the second floor, why didn't she leave that place?" After a moment of silence, the second floor god said, "She's using the fire poison in that place to heal." Yi Xian was slightly startled. "She's also injured?" "Nonsense." The second floor god said, "This pagoda was heavily damaged in the past. Who wasn't affected? It's just that some are lighter and some are heavier." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "If these Tao laws return to this pagoda in the future and I'm not very strong, other than death, do you have any other choice?" The second floor god suddenly said. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Now he gradually realized that this world prison pagoda was becoming more and more complicated. With such a treasure, if he didn't have comparable strength, he could only wait for death, as the second floor god had said. Strength. He had to have great strength. "Brother Yi." At this moment, a voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Yi Xian looked up and saw a man standing not far in front of him. It was the man he had met before. "This chapter is not finished. Please continue." It was Ming Kuan. Ming Kuan looked behind Yi Xian and said, "Has Yi Xian reached the end?" Yi Xian thought for a while and smiled. "No, but I'm a little tired today. I don't want to leave. I'll leave another day." Ming Kuan's eyes were filled with admiration. "Brother Ye's strength is admirable." "Admirable." Yi Xian smiled, just as a. Ming Kuan shook his head. "Brother Yi is too humble." Yi Xian changed the topic. "Brother Ming Kuan, do you want to continue or?" Ming Kuan hesitated for a while and smiled bitterly. "I think this is my limit. So I'll go with Brother Yi." Yi Xian smiled. "We're going the same way." Just like that, the two walked together. On the way, Ming Kuan walked very slowly because he had to resist the fire poison. Yi Xian walked very casually because the fire poison didn't dare to approach him. Every time he saw the fire poison leave Yi Xian, Ming Kuan was in awe. Yi Xian spoke abruptly. "Brother Ming Kuan, have you joined any organizations?" Ming Kuan shook his head. "I like to be alone." Yi Xian was delighted in his heart and he hurriedly said, "I've established the virtue school. Brother Ming Kuan, are you interested in joining it? We can chat and discuss the martial Tao together." Ming Kuan was slightly hesitant. Meanwhile, Yi Xian said, "Even though it's quiet to cultivate alone, it's like building a cart behind closed doors. If we discuss it together, then perhaps we'll obtain unexpected gains." Ming Kuan glanced at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, are you willing to discuss your attainments in the martial Tao with others?" Yi Xian smiled. "Yes. Of course, it's only limited to our own people like friends and brothers." Ming Kuan thought for a moment and said, "All right, I'll join." Yi Xian was overjoyed when he heard this. Ming Kuan's strength was absolutely not inferior to Nanshan. Because Ming Kuan's ability to rely on his strength to travel so far on the violet flame path was sufficient to explain everything. With the addition of Ming Kuan, the strength of the virtue school would definitely increase greatly. In next to no time, the two of them left the violet flame path and Xiaogu and the others were waiting at the exit. Xiaogu and the others heaved sighs of relief when they saw Yi Xian, and they were stunned when they saw Ming Kuan. Yi Xian led Ming Kuan over to Xiaogu and the others and he smiled as he said, "This is Brother Ming Kuan. I just got to know him. From now on, he's a member of our virtue school." Everyone was stunned once more when they heard this. "A member of the virtue school?" Xiaogu looked at Yi Xian. "Are you sure?" Yi Xian nodded. "Of course I'm sure." But Xiaogu hesitated for a moment and then he said, "Brother Yi, do you know who he is?" Yi Xian shook his head. Xiao Gu smiled and said, he's one of the 4 great monstrous geniuses of the inner court, Ming Kuan. The 4 great monstrous geniuses. Yi Xian smiled. In fact, he had already guessed it. Ming Kuan suddenly said, what 4 great monstrous geniuses? We dare to call ourselves monstrous geniuses in the inner court, but if we go out we are nothing. He paused for a moment and then he glanced at Yi Xian. Of course, brother Yi, you can be called a monstrous genius wherever you go. Yi Xian said, brother Ming Kuan, do you mean that there are more monstrous geniuses than the inner court out there? Ming Kuan smiled bitterly. Many. The never-ending starfield is divided into the southern region, the northern region and the heaven region. Our Dao Yi Academy belongs to the northern region. The true geniuses of the never-ending starfield are in the heaven region. Even the southern region is much more powerful than here. Then he looked out of the violet flame tower and said softly, if you can't leave a word on the Dao pillar of the heaven region, how can you call yourself a monstrous genius? P.S. Everyone can leave a comment to see how many fans you have. End of this chapter. Chapter 373. Dao Pillar. Hearing this, everyone looked at Ming Kuan. Ming Kuan nodded. In the distant heaven region there is a Dao Pillar. No one knows the origin of this Dao Pillar, but they know that it contains a supreme Dao. Only those who can leave their names on it are truly monstrous. He glanced at the crowd and smiled bitterly. Until now, only 3 people from the northern region have managed to leave their names on it. One of them is the founder of the Dao Yi Academy, Dean Mu. Mu Daoyi. Everyone's expression turned solemn. To them Mu Daoyi was a legend. Ming Kuan continued, our Dao Yi Academy is not bad in the northern region, but in the southern region and the heaven region. At this point he didn't continue. Everyone understood what he meant. At this time Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, why should we belittle ourselves? If others are stronger than us, that's a good thing. It proves that we still have room to grow and we have a goal to pursue. Then he patted Ming Kuan's shoulder and said with a smile, believe in yourself. We won't be worse than others. Ming Kuan thought about it and nodded. Brother Yi is right. We have to correct our attitude. Yi Xian laughed and said, all of you cultivate well here. I have to go take care of something. With that he turned around and left. After Yi Xian left, Ming Kuan suddenly looked at Xiao Gu. Did brother Yi just enter the inner court? Xiao Gu nodded. Just entered. Ming Kuan said softly, Yi Xian's strength is truly unfathomable. Xiao Gu. After leaving the Dao Yi Institute, Yi Xian went to Dao Yi City and found a chamber of commerce. Taihe Merchant Association. After Yi Xian entered the chamber of commerce, a delicate and pretty woman came to greet him. She glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, what do you need? Yi Xian said, I need 3 things: divine soul wood, heart protecting lotus, spirit sculpting flower. Do you have it? The pretty woman looked at Yi Xian and said, sir, these aren't ordinary things. Yi Xian laughed. Are you afraid that I can't afford it? The pretty woman hurriedly said, that's not what I mean, it's just that. Yi Xian smiled and said, can you make the decision? If you can't make the decision, then let someone who can make the decision talk to me. The pretty woman bowed slightly. Then please wait a moment. With that she turned around and left. Not long after, an old man walked out. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and asked, what 3 items do you want? Yi Xian nodded. The old man smiled and said, those 3 items are all extraordinary items, especially the heart-protecting lotus. It is incomparably precious and is worth at least 100,000 purple Genesis crystals. 100,000. Hearing this, Yi Xian's heart relaxed. 100,000 purple Genesis crystals was naturally a piece of cake for him. Yi Xian hurriedly said, then please bring those 3 items over. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, it seems that you aren't an ordinary person. May I know who you are? Yi Xian was a little impatient. I'm just an independent cultivator. Sir, I urgently need those 3 items. The old man smiled and said, esteemed guest, my chamber of commerce does not have these 3 items. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression instantly turned cold. What the hell are you talking about if you don't have them? The old man continued, esteemed guest, please don't misunderstand. The old man means that we don't have them here. However, we can transfer the goods. It will take a day. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, then transfer the goods as soon as possible. The old man smiled and said, "You need to pay first. 200,000 purple Genesis crystals as a deposit. If you suddenly don't want it, we won't refund the money." A deposit? Xian hesitated for a moment before he tapped with his finger, and a spatial ring flew over to the old man. There were exactly 200,000 purple Genesis crystals within the spatial ring. The old man grinned as he put the spatial ring away, and then he said, "Please come here at the same time tomorrow." Xian cupped his fists and said, "Then I'll be troubling you." He turned around and left once he finished speaking. Xian returned to Dao Yi Academy after he left the Grand Harmony Merchant Group. Xian entered the World Prison Pagoda in his wooden house. A sword technique. Now he could finally calm down and study the sword technique that the figure in the gray world had given him. The sword technique didn't have a name, but he could sense that it was very powerful. Xian started to study it, and it didn't take long for him to notice a special characteristic of the sword technique. The most special characteristic of the sword technique was its explosive force. The explosive force at the instant the sword was drawn. This sword technique was different from the life and death sword technique. The might of the life and death sword technique was related to faith and confidence, while this sword technique was purely related to strength and speed. The two were completely different. With this thought in mind, an idea suddenly popped into Xian's mind. Could he fuse these two different sword techniques into one? Fuse. Xian was a little excited because he realized that it was completely possible. Xian didn't just think about it but immediately tried it. However, as soon as he tried it, he ran into a problem. The scabbard. He found that a normal scabbard couldn't withstand these two sword techniques. No, just the sword technique of drawing the sword wasn't something a normal scabbard could withstand. He needed to find a suitable scabbard. Without a scabbard, Xian could only temporarily give up on fusing the two sword techniques. What he could do now was to study and thoroughly comprehend this sword technique. Time slowly passed. On the second day, Xian left the World Prison Pagoda and once again arrived at the Grand Harmony Merchant Group in Dao Yi City. The person who welcomed him was still the delicate and pretty woman from yesterday. Xian smiled and said, "Please inform your merchant group's manager that I'm here to collect something." The delicate and pretty woman nodded. "Please wait." Then she turned and left. Not long after, the delicate and pretty woman walked out. She walked up to Xian and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, Manager Su isn't here." Xian frowned. "He told me to come here today to collect something. Why isn't he here?" The delicate and pretty woman shook her head. "I don't know, please come back tomorrow." Then she turned and left. Seeing this, Xian's frown deepened, and he fell silent for a moment before he turned and left. The next day, Xian came to the Grand Harmony Merchant Group again and saw the delicate and pretty woman again. He was just about to speak when the delicate and pretty woman said, "Manager Su isn't here, please come back another day." Then she turned and left. Xian suddenly stood in front of the delicate and pretty woman, and the delicate and pretty woman frowned slightly. Xian smiled. "He doesn't want to see me, right?" The delicate and pretty woman replied, "Manager Su isn't here." Xian suddenly slammed his right hand. Boom. Not far away, the wall collapsed and an old man appeared there. It was Manager Su. Xian pointed at Steward Su, who was not far away, and said with a smile, "Didn't you say he wasn't here?" The delicate and pretty woman looked at Xian and did not speak. At this time, Manager Su walked in front of Xian, his expression calm. "What, are you going to use force here?" Xian smiled. "I wouldn't dare, I'm just here to collect something I need." "Give it to me, I'll leave immediately." "Something?" Manager Su was expressionless. "What is it? The old man doesn't know." Hearing this, Xian was instantly happy. He smiled. "This Grand Harmony Merchant Group is actually a black shop." Manager Su narrowed his eyes, a cold light flashing in his eyes. "Sir, you can't say such things." As his voice fell, 6 people suddenly appeared behind him, all of them void-piercing realm experts. Manager Su looked coldly at Xian. "This wall is worth 100,000 purple origin crystals. Leave 100,000 purple origin crystals and I'll let you live." 100,000 purple origin crystals. Xian thought for a moment. He smiled. "Are you sure you want it?" Manager Su said indifferently, "Why not?" Xian pointed his finger and a storage ring flew in front of Steward Su. Steward Su glanced at the storage ring. There were exactly 100,000 purple origin crystals in it. Manager Su put away the storage ring and looked at Xian. "Let's go." Yi Xian smiled, turned around and left. Manager Su and the others did not stop him. At this time, the delicate and pretty woman suddenly said, "Why don't you kill him and get rid of future troubles?" Manager Su said indifferently, "Why kill him? He's just a true defensive realm, let him come for revenge. If he doesn't come for revenge, how can I earn more?" With that he turned around and left. After Yi Xian left Tai He Merchant Association, he immediately returned to Dao Yi Academy. Inside the Violet Flame Tower, Yi Xian found Xiao Gu and the others. "What? Brother Yi, you were extorted 10 million purple origin crystals by Tai He Merchant Association? Holy shit, 10 million purple origin crystals. Is Tai He Merchant Association crazy? How dare they extort our Dao Yi Academy? Let's go tell the Grand Elder." With that, everyone was about to find the Grand Elder. At this time Yi Xian suddenly said, "Why find the Grand Elder? We'll settle this ourselves. Come brothers, follow me to Tai He Merchant Association." With that he turned around and left. Xiao Gu and the others hurriedly followed. On the way Xiao Gu said in a deep voice, "Brother Yi, this Tai He Merchant Association is not simple. It is the largest merchant association in our northern region, with astonishing financial resources and vast connections. We have to be careful." Yi Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Be careful, everyone, be careful. This time we're here to reason things out." Hearing this, Xiao Ji's expression relaxed slightly. Reason meant that the matter would not be blown out of proportion. Soon Yi Xian brought 12 inner courtyard students to Tai He Merchant Association. The sudden arrival of so many experts naturally alarmed Tai He Merchant Association. Soon several void-piercing realm experts blocked in front of Yi Xian and the others. The one leading them was Steward Su from before. Seeing Yi Xian, Steward Su was slightly taken aback. Then he glanced at the people beside Yi Xian, and his expression quickly turned solemn. Because the people who came were all void-piercing realm experts, of course, except for Yi Xian. Beside Yi Xian, Xiao Gu looked at Steward Su. "Brother Yi, is he the one who extorted 10 million purple origin crystals from you?" Yi Xian nodded, his face full of grief and indignation. It's him, he extorted 10 million purple origin crystals from me." Hearing this, Steward Su was stunned, then he flew into a rage. "What nonsense are you talking about?" At this moment Yi Xian, who was in front of him, suddenly disappeared. The next second a sword pierced his throat. Blood splattered. Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Xiao Gu looked at Yi Xian, his face full of shock. "Big brother, didn't you say you were reasonable?" Yi Xian said indifferently, "This is my way of reasoning." Xiao Gu. Chapter 374. In the field, everyone was struck dumb after Yi Xian had made his move. Obviously they did not expect Yi Xian to suddenly attack. Steward Su, who was still breathing, was also staring at Yi Xian. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. He did not expect Yi Xian to attack him. Moreover, he did not even have the strength to fight back. At this moment, a group of experts suddenly appeared in the surroundings. They were all from the Tai He Trade Association. At the same time, a black-robed old man appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. The black-robed old man glanced at Yi Xian and the others, frowning slightly. "Are you from the Dao Yi Academy?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes, we are from the Dao Yi Academy." The black-robed old man stared at Yi Xian. "Why did you kill people from my Tai He Trade Association?" Yi Xian sneered. "Senior, you should ask him that." The black-robed old man's expression gradually turned cold. "You want me to ask a dead person?" Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, I forgot about this. It's like this. 2 days ago I came to your trade association to buy a batch of things. Steward Su asked me to pay 200,000 purple origin crystals as a deposit, which I did. However, when I came today, not only did he not give me what I wanted, he even starved me of 10 million purple origin crystals. 10 million purple origin crystals." Hearing Yi Xian's words, the black-robed old man's eyelids twitched. 10 million purple origin crystals? Are you sure? Yi Xian sternly said, "Of course I'm sure. Senior, I have no other request. As long as your trade association compensates me with 10 million purple origin crystals, I will naturally leave." Compensate 10 million purple origin crystals. The black-robed old man laughed in anger. Interesting. To think that someone would come to extort my Tai He Trade Association today. Interesting. Yi Xian said indifferently, Taihe Trade Association does not intend to compensate? The black-robed old man sneered. Do you think my Taihe Trade Association is so easy to bully? Right at this moment, Zhou Xian said abruptly, "Seize everything in the Imperial Harmony Trading Company. Leave nothing behind." As his voice faded, he suddenly drew his sword and charged toward the black-robed elder. Seeing this scene, Xiao Gu and the others were stunned. Robbing Taihe Merchant Association? By the time everyone regained their senses, Zhou Xian had already started fighting with the black-robed old man. Xiao Gu and the others looked at each other. Soon Xiao Ji's expression became somewhat sinister. Taihe Chamber of Commerce is bullying our Dao Yi Academy. Beat them up. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone rushed over. In the Dao Yi Academy, inside the Dao Yi Hall, the first elder suddenly sat up and looked at an old man in front of him in disbelief. What did you say? He brought inner courtyard disciples to rob Taihe Merchant Association. The old man nodded. Yes, they have already started fighting with the Taihe Chamber of Commerce. The matter is very big and many people in the city are already paying attention. The first elder said in a deep voice, "Why did he rob Taihe Merchant Association?" The old man said, "It is said that he went to Taihe Merchant Association to buy a few things, and a steward of Taihe Merchant Association embezzled his money. This should be true, but it is absolutely not 10 million purple source crystals. This guy must have deliberately blackmailed Taihe Merchant Association." Speaking of this, he shook his head with a wry smile. "This guy is really bold." The first elder said indifferently, "Not only is he bold but he is also cunning." The old man looked at the first elder. "What do you mean?" The first elder chuckled. This was originally his own matter, but now he has forcibly turned it into a matter between Taihe Merchant Association and our Dao Yi Academy. Saying that, he got up. "Let's go and have a look." Taihe Merchant Association. Zhou Xian and the others have already started fighting with Taihe Merchant Association. As soon as the battle began, Taihe Merchant Association's side was completely annihilated. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. Under Zhou Xian's order, Xiao Gu and the others also frantically looted the Taihe Merchant Association's things. At first, Xiao Gu and the others were a little hesitant, but soon they became even crazier than Zhou Xian. Taihe Merchant Association is the best merchant association in Daoyi City. How could the things inside be ordinary? The black-robed old man who was fighting with Zhou Xian was shocked and angry. He was shocked because he did not expect Zhou Xian, who was only at the true Imperial Law realm, to be so terrifying, and angry because more than half of the Taihe Merchant Association's things had been looted by Xiao Gu and the others. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the battlefield. "Stop." As the voice fell, a powerful force suddenly enveloped Zhou Xian and the others. Everyone stopped. Zhou Xian looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing quietly in the air, and the middle-aged man was looking at him. The middle-aged man looked down at Zhou Xian. "Did the Dao Yi Academy give you the courage?" As the voice fell, an invisible pressure suddenly fell from the sky, pressing down on Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian was about to act, but an old man suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the first elder. The first elder gently waved his right hand, and the invisible pressure disappeared directly. The first elder appeared in front of the middle-aged man, smiled and said, "Brother Song Lian, I trust you have been well since we last met." The middle-aged man called Song Lian looked coldly at the first elder. "First elder, your Dao Yi Academy openly robbed my Taihe Merchant Association. How do you explain that?" The first elder shook his head and smiled. "Brother Song Lian, this matter is your Taihe Merchant Association's fault. My student came to buy things from your Taihe Merchant Association, but your steward wanted to take advantage of him and even blackmailed him. This matter, your Taihe Merchant Association did not act in the right way." Song Lian frowned slightly and turned to look at the black-robed old man below. The black-robed old man said in a deep voice, "I don't know the specific situation." As he spoke, he turned to look at the delicate woman not far away. "What exactly is the situation?" The delicate woman was somewhat hesitant. Seeing this, the black-robed old man's face immediately sank. At this moment, the first elder suddenly smiled and said, "Brother Song Lian, the matter is very clear, isn't it?" Hearing this, the delicate woman below hurriedly said, "No, although Steward Su took 200,000 purple Genesis crystals from him, he did not blackmail him for 10 million purple Genesis crystals." As soon as these words came out, Song Lian's face suddenly turned ugly, and the surrounding people booed. Cheating. Taihe Merchant Association really cheated. Song Lian suddenly waved his right hand, and the delicate woman directly turned into a pile of minced meat. Song Lian threw a cold look at Yi Xian below. In the end he looked at the Grand Elder. Congratulations to your institute for getting such an excellent student. With that he turned and left. Below, Yi Xian hurriedly said, My 10 million purple Genesis crystals. The first elder appeared in front of Yi Xian and glanced at Yi Xian. Know when to stop. Yi Xian said indifferently, They blackmailed me, how can I let this matter go? The corners of the first elder's mouth twitched. You've already robbed more than half of their chamber of commerce. You've made a profit. Profit. Yi Xian thought about it and agreed. At this moment the first elder suddenly said, Yi Xian, what you did is equivalent to offending the Taihe Merchant Association, do you know that? Yi Xian smiled. First elder, I am not a troublemaker, but the Taihe Merchant Association has bullied me, I can't tolerate it. The first elder glanced at Yi Xian, shook his head and sighed. In the future, if there is nothing important, try not to leave the academy. The Taiheng Merchant Association has suffered such a big loss this time, they will not let this matter rest. Yi Xian nodded, I understand. The first elder nodded. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Then he turned and left. Yi Xian took Xiaogu and the others back to the Dao Yi Academy. Inside Yi Xian's wooden house, everyone gathered around the table. Dividing the spoils. Xiaogu smiled. This time, we obtained a total of 6 million purple origin crystals, including 49 heaven-grade treasures and various heaven and earth treasures. I estimate that they are worth about 2 million purple origin crystals. A total of 8 million. Yi Xian smiled. Xiaogu, you divide it, everyone has a share. Xiaogu grinned, then began to divide the spoils. He first gave it to Yi Xian, but Yi Xian frowned. What do you mean by this? He obtained 3 million purple origin crystals. Xiaogu smiled. Brother Yi, the reason why we obtained so much this time is all because of you. You contributed the most, so naturally you should obtain it. We have no objections. Everyone nodded, indicating that they had no objections. Yi Xian shook his head. If it weren't for the brothers, I wouldn't have been able to suppress the Taihe Chamber of Commerce. Everyone has contributed, so let's divide it equally. Xiaogu still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian sternly said, If I said to divide it equally, then so be it, do it. Seeing that Yi Xian was so determined, Xiaogu hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Soon everyone divided the wealth. Inside the bamboo house, everyone had a bright smile on their faces. With this wealth, it could be said that they would not lack purple origin crystals for a short period of time. And this time Yi Xian's position in everyone's hearts also changed a little. After everyone left, Yi Xian came to the divine weapon courtyard of the Dao Yi Academy. There were many rare treasures stored inside. His purpose this time was to see if there was a suitable scabbard for him. But just as he arrived at the entrance of the divine weapon courtyard, he was stopped by an old man. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. Do you have an entry token? Yi Xian was stunned. Entry token? What entry token? The old man glanced at Yi Xian. If not, what are you doing here? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, Who do I find for this entry token? The old man said lightly, Go find the Grand Elder. Yi Xian smiled. Okay, I'll go find the Grand Elder. After saying that, he turned and ran. Old man, Dao Yi Hall. Yi Xian found the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder looked at Yi Xian in front of him. You want to go to the divine weapon courtyard? Yi Xian nodded. The Grand Elder asked, What for? Yi Xian said, To find something. The Grand Elder's eyes twitched. What do you think the divine weapon courtyard is? You think you can go there whenever you want? Yi Xian said with a smile. I understand there must be some conditions to enter. Grand Elder, why don't you tell me about it? The Grand Elder said lightly, There are no harsh conditions. You can enter as long as you have performed a meritorious deed for the academy. Meritorious deed. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, I have performed a meritorious deed for the academy. The Grand Elder looked at Yi Xian a little surprised. When have you performed a meritorious deed for the academy? Yi Xian said seriously, Grand Elder, what do you think of me, Yi Xian? The Grand Elder looked at Yi Xian, then said, Not bad talent, not bad strength, and outstanding combat ability, rare. Yi Xian said seriously. Grand Elder, I am not narcissistic, but a genius like me joining the Dao Yi Academy is in itself a meritorious deed for the Academy. And a meritorious deed. The Grand Elder was dumbfounded. End of this chapter. Chapter 375. The first elder stared at Yi Xian. He didn't expect that someone in this world could be so shameless. So shameless that he was speechless. After a while, the first elder shook his head and smiled. What do you need? Yi Xian said quickly. A scabbard. Scabbard? The first elder thought for a while and said, that's not difficult. You don't need to enter the institute. I'll give you a scabbard. Yi Xian shook his head. First elder, the scabbard I need isn't an ordinary scabbard. I need a very good scabbard. How good is it? The first elder asked. Yi Xian thought for a while and said, Saint rank. His intuition told him that if it wasn't a Saint rank scabbard, it wouldn't be able to bear those two sword skills. Must be a Saint rank scabbard. The first elder was stunned by Yi Xian's words and shook his head. No. The old man can tell you for sure that the institute doesn't have a Saint rank scabbard. He paused for a while and said, the Immortal Sword Sect might have one, but they won't give it to you. The Immortal Sword Sect. Yi Xian fell silent. The first elder suddenly said, besides the Immortal Sword Sect, there's another place you can go. Yi Xian asked quickly, where? The first elder said, the blacksmith's shop. The blacksmith's shop? Yi Xian was puzzled. Where? The first elder said with a smile, in Dao Yi City. There's a blacksmith there, a very powerful one. He might be able to customize a scabbard for you. However, whether or not he will do it for you will depend on your own ability. Yi Xian thought for a while and said, I'll give it a try. The first elder smiled. Good luck. Yi Xian said again, First elder, I want to ask you for a favor. The first elder said, Speak. Yi Xian said, I need 3 items. The great elder said, the 3 items you bought from Taihe Merchant Association? Yi Xian nodded. The great elder nodded slightly. I'll do it for you, but you'll have to pay for it yourself. Yi Xian smiled and said, Of course. Then I'll visit great elder another day. With that he bowed slightly before turning around and leaving. Seeing Yi Xian leave, the great elder shook his head and lightly laughed. Actually, his personality isn't that bad. In the beginning he had indeed coveted Yi Xian's treasure. But in the end he gradually changed his mind. Just as the mysterious black-clothed man had said, the treasure on Yi Xian's body would bring bad luck to whoever took it. Instead of seizing this hot potato by force, it was better to form a good relationship with Yi Xian and wait for the future. Moreover, he realized that Yi Xian was a person who was easy to get along with. Of course, he was also a bit irascible, but this irascibility in his view was actually a kind of personality. After Yi Xian left Daoyi Palace Hall, he came to Daoyi City. Soon he found the blacksmith shop that the great elder had mentioned. The blacksmith shop was not big, it should be said to be very small, and it was a bit shabby. In front of the blacksmith shop there was some messy scrap iron. At first glance it looked very desolate. Yi Xian walked to the door and knocked. At this time, a voice suddenly came from inside. Scram. Yi Xian. Naturally, Yi Xian would not give up so easily. He knocked on the door again. At this time a powerful force shook out from inside. Yi Xian's face changed and his right arm moved forward to block. Bang! Yi Xian retreated again and again. This time he directly retreated dozens of feet. After Yi Xian stopped, he looked at his right arm. His entire right arm had cracked. His expression gradually became serious. Soon Yi Xian walked up to the door and knocked on it once more. Boom! Yi Xian was sent flying again. Just like this continued for about half an hour and the door opened. An old man in tattered clothes walked out. He pointed at Yi Xian angrily. Are you out of your mind? Is there something wrong with you? Is there no end to this? As he spoke, he suddenly stopped. Because Yi Xian, who was not far away, turned around and ran. He did not even see a shadow. The old man was stunned. After a moment, the old man cursed angrily. What the hell? After saying that, he turned around and returned to his room. The next day, Yi Xian came to the blacksmith shop again and knocked on the door again. An hour later, the blacksmith shop's door was suddenly opened, and an afterimage shot out. In the distance, Yi Xian turned around and ran. The old man who rushed out had an ugly expression on his face. On the third day, just as Yi Xian knocked on the door, A powerful force suddenly blasted out from the door. Xian turned around and ran. This time the old man chose to give chase. He sensed the old man chasing after him. Xian hurriedly quickened his pace. Not only that, but he also used the chaotic energy to conceal himself. Thus, very quickly the old man lost track of him. Somewhere outside the city, the old man looked around coldly. At this moment there was no longer any trace of Xian's aura. A moment later he turned around and left. On the fourth day Xian came to the smithy again. Just like that, on the seventh day Xian knocked on the door and turned around to run. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind him. "Bastard, what do you want?" Xian stopped and turned around. He saw the old man coldly staring at him at the blacksmith shop's door. Xian grinned. "Greetings, senior. This junior is Xian from Dao Yi Academy." The old man looked coldly at Xian. "What do you want?" Xian smiled. "Senior, this junior wants to ask you to forge a scabbard for me. Hurry up and get lost." The old man waved his hand impatiently. "The old man will not forge anything for anyone. Scram." After saying that, he turned around and walked into the house. Outside the house, Xian was silent for a moment, then turned around and left. The next day Xian came to the smithy again and knocked on the door. When the door opened and saw Xian, the old man frowned. "Are you done?" Xian said. "I want to learn blacksmithing." Blacksmithing? He thought of something. He needed huge swords, and if he were to buy all of them he would not be able to afford it even with his wealth. Why not forge them himself? Learn blacksmithing. Hearing Xian's words, the old man was slightly stunned. "You want to learn blacksmithing?" Xian immediately said. "Yes, I want to learn blacksmithing." The old man sneered. "What does it have to do with this old man? Go learn it with someone else. This old man has no time for you." Xian said indifferently. "If you don't accept me, I will not give up." Hearing this, the old man flew into a rage. "Are you threatening me?" Xian hurriedly said. No. Senior, to be honest, don't be so quick to refuse me. Look at me. I'm not bad." The old man glared at Xian. "Why is your skin so thick?" Xian said seriously. "Senior, I'm serious. You definitely won't be disappointed if you let me try." The old man stared at Xian for a long time and then he said, "You aren't just being thick-skinned. You've reached a state of shamelessness." Xian was speechless. The old man sized up Xian. "Who asked you to come here?" Xian said, "The Grand Elder." The old man frowned. "The Grand Elder of Dao Yi Academy?" Xian nodded. "Yes." The old man fell silent for a short while before he said, "The old man doesn't accept disciples, nor does he forge anything for others." Don't bother the old man. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and was about to enter the room. Xian suddenly said, "Senior." The old man stopped and turned around to look at Xian. Xian smiled. "Senior, do you have anyone to recommend?" "Right, I don't recommend just anyone. I need a scabbard, an extremely good one. Only then will it be able to endure my sword techniques." The old man sized up Xian. "You need a scabbard? Not a sword?" Xian nodded. The old man spoke indifferently. "You're quite arrogant. Tell me, what level of scabbard do you need?" Xian spoke solemnly. "The saint rank." The old man sneered. "It's just a saint rank. Go, don't bother the old man." After that he turned around and left. At this time Xian suddenly said, "What do you mean by a saint rank? Old man, do you know what a saint rank is?" "Do you?" The old man's eyes twitched. The old man doesn't know what a saint rank is? As he spoke, he waved his right hand and an arm-long iron hammer suddenly flew to Xian from a corner not far away. Xian was stunned when he saw the iron hammer because it was a saint rank. It really is a saint rank. Xian's expression became solemn. "Who is this old man?" The old man sneered. "Do you have a saint rank?" Xian said solemnly, "Old man, I'm not bragging, but if I take something out it will definitely scare the crap out of you." A wisp of ridicule appeared on the corners of the old man's mouth. "You want to scare me out of my wits? What a big tone you have. What treasure has the old man not seen in his life?" Xian said lightly, "Old man, since it's like this, let's make a bet. If the item I take out can amaze you, you'll forge a scabbard for me. If not, I'll leave and never bother you again. How about it?" The old man coldly looked at Xian. "In the end, it's still a scabbard. You're not only thick-skinned but also cunning. A swordsman like you is hard to come by in 1,000 years. Yi Xian was expressionless. Just tell me if you want to bet or not. The old man sneered. Bet, of course I want to bet. The old man wants to see what treasure you have that can amaze the old man. However, I'll say this in advance, if you can't amaze the old man, you'll leave and never come back. Yi Xian nodded. Remember, if I amaze you, you'll forge a scabbard no lower than the saint level. The old man said lightly. Fine. Now take out your treasure. Yi Xian looked around and said, It's not convenient here. Come with me. Then he turned and left. The old man frowned, but he still followed. Soon Yi Xian led the old man to a mountain range outside Daoyi City. Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at the old man. The old man said lightly, Take it out. Yi Xian smiled. He opened his right hand, and a sword suddenly appeared in front of him. The sword at the top of the pagoda. When the sword appeared in front of him, heaven and earth changed color in an instant. The old man was stunned. Chapter 376. At this moment the old man's eyes were wide open, and they were filled with disbelief. It didn't take long for him to walk swiftly towards the sword. Meanwhile Yi Xian sheathed the sword. The surroundings instantly returned to calm. The old man walked over to Yi Xian, and he stared fixedly at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, based on your expression, it should have shocked you. The old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. What is that? Yi Xian smiled and said, Pai sword. The old man fell silent for a moment and then he shook his head. This sword isn't a peerless weapon, but its owner is extremely strong and he gave it new life. To put it simply, the sword is very ordinary but the owner is extraordinary. Therefore the sword is extraordinary as well. When he spoke up to this point he looked at Yi Xian. You're just a sword immortal, and you don't have the ability to give a sword new life. Yi Xian fell silent. This old man really isn't simple. Meanwhile the old man said, All right, the old man said it. I never expected that I would encounter such a divine object here. Yi Xian grinned when he heard this. Senior, when will you forge a scabbard for me? The old man fell silent. Yi Xian's face sank. This old man wouldn't go back on his word, right? As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the old man sneered. Don't worry, the old man won't go back on his word. Yi Xian chuckled. How could a figure like Senior possibly go back on his word? I have complete confidence in Senior. The old man said indifferently, Come with me. As he spoke, Yi Xian followed the old man back to the smithy. After they entered the smithy, a cold and musty smell instantly assaulted their faces, and it was extremely unpleasant. The old man walked over to the side and lay down on a bamboo couch. He said indifferently, Let me see your sword. I need to make one for you. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he withdrew the saint-rank dark sword. The elder waved his right hand and the dark blue sword flew into his grasp. He glanced at the sword in his hand. Pseudo-saint tier. Pseudo-saint level? Yi Xian was stunned. What do you mean? The old man said coldly, It means that your sword is trash. Do you understand? Yi Xian's face darkened. Senior, is this sword trash? The old man sneered. The craftsmanship of this sword is passable, but the materials used are trash. If it wasn't for the sword's spirit being a bit special, this sword wouldn't even be considered a pseudo-saint grade sword. As he spoke, he threw the sword in front of Yi Xian. This sword won't do. Change to another one. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. No more. Speaking up to here, he seemed to have thought of something and chuckled. Senior, why don't you forge a sword for me directly? It would be perfect to forge a sword and a scabbard together. Dream on. The old man glared at Yi Xian. This old man will only make a scabbard for you. Yi Xian was slightly helpless. A scabbard it is. As he spoke, he waved the sword in his hand. This is my best sword, so I'll make a scabbard for it. The old man spoke indifferently. Are you sure? After all, you only have this chance. If you have a good sword, then you'll have an even better scabbard. Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Senior, I want to, but I don't have any other swords. I'll just make do with it for now. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. What about the one from before? Yi Xian shrugged. It's too formidable. I can't take it for now. The old man fell silent for a short moment before he said, If you're willing, then you can lend that sword to me and I'll forge a replica for you. How about it? Yi Xian was stunned. A replica? What do you mean? The old man spoke in a low voice. I'll forge a replica, one that you can use. How about it? Yi Xian fell silent. The old man spoke indifferently. It's fine if you're worried. Yi Xian shook his head. There's nothing to be worried about. But senior, I'm unable to control this sword. So, it would cause a huge commotion if I let it out. The old man fell silent for a short moment before he said, Come with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and walked towards the exit. Yi Xian hurriedly followed the old man. Yi Xian followed the old man to an underground entrance, and then he followed the old man all the way down. Just like that, they walked for almost 4 hours. When they walked out of an exit, the scene before his eyes suddenly opened up, and there was an abandoned ruin 300 m away from him. The old man led Yi Xian to the ruins, and it wasn't long before the old man stopped. There was an enormous furnace before him, and there was lava within it. Yi Xian turned around to look at the old man. What's this? The old man spoke indifferently. This iron furnace is connected to the center of the earth, and it contains an extremely large amount of the energy of the earth veins and lava. As he spoke, he turned to look at Yi Xian. Sword. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and the sword at the top of the tower instantly appeared in front of him. At the instant that sword appeared, the ground around him started trembling. The old man's expression instantly turned solemn when he witnessed this scene. The might of this sword far surpasses this world. How formidable was its owner? As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian. Kid, your background isn't simple at all. Yi Xian laughed embarrassedly. No, I don't have any backing. Really? The old man laughed coldly. Don't worry. The old man has no intentions towards you. As he spoke, he waved his right hand. In an instant, an invisible force appeared in the surroundings, and Yi Xian sensed that the space around him seemed to have been strengthened at that moment. The old man ignored Yi Xian. He waved his right hand again, and a large pile of items appeared on his right. These items were strangely shaped, and one could tell at a glance that they weren't ordinary items. Very soon Yi Xian seemed to have noticed something, and he hurriedly asked, Senior, are these materials for forging swords? The old man glanced at Yi Xian. Of course. I told you to prepare the materials. Do you have them? Hearing this, Yi Xian was instantly overjoyed. He suddenly realized that this old man was actually quite nice. The old man ignored Yi Xian and turned to look at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. There was a trace of excitement in his eyes as he looked at the sword. Yi Xian was quite excited as well. He couldn't utilize the sword at the top of the pagoda for now, and it was something that he'd always felt regretful about. On the other hand, if he had a replica, then it would definitely be a good thing for him, because it could allow him to make a transition. The old man suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. Put the sword away. I'll use it when I need it. Yi Xian did as he was told and put the sword away. On the other hand, the old man raised his right hand lightly, and it didn't take long for all the treasures on his right to fly up into the air. After that, they flew into the iron furnace one by one. At the same time, he withdrew a command token, and it didn't take long for the enormous iron furnace to start trembling. At the same time, the lava within the iron furnace started to tremble, and it didn't take long for countless strands of mysterious energy to converge within the iron furnace. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and said, Stand guard. As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped up into the iron furnace. Outside the iron furnace, Yi Xian rubbed his hands together with slight excitement. The sword forged by this old man is definitely at the saint rank at the very least. Moreover, there's even a sheath. At that time he would be able to combine both sword techniques, and his overall strength would improve by more than just a little. Wait. All he could do now was wait. Just like that, day after day passed. On the third day, there was still no movement from within the iron furnace. Yi Xian had wanted to go in and take a look on many occasions, but he didn't in the end. Because he knew that if he was interrupted at the critical moment, then it was very likely that all his efforts would be wasted. So he continued waiting. Just like that, on the 5th day the iron furnace started to tremble slightly, and Yi Xian hurriedly stood up. Is it about to be done? At this moment Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Not far in front of him, a young man and an old man were walking towards him. The young man and the old man were slightly stunned when they saw Yi Xian. The young man sized up Yi Xian and frowned. Who are you? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Who are you? The young man's frown deepened. I'm asking you a question. Yi Xian replied calmly. I'm a student of the inner court of Dao Yi Academy. Dao Yi Academy. The young man turned to look at the old man, and the old man replied calmly, it's an academy in the northern region. When Mu Daoyi was still around it was not bad, but now, it's not good enough. Hearing this, the young man looked at Yi Xian. Why are you here? Yi Xian smiled, to run some errands. The young man looked straight at Yi Xian. Now get lost. I won't repeat myself. Chapter 377. Yi Xian remained silent. The other party did not even give face to the Dao Yi Academy. Clearly the other party had a powerful background. Since the Dao Yi Academy's reputation was useless, he had to make his move. He chose to make the first move. Yi Xian suddenly wielded his sword. This sword attack was very fast and there was no sign at all. Before the young man could react, Yi Xian's sword was already at his forehead. The old man had appeared on Yi Xian's left side. His left hand was about 10 inches away from Yi Xian's shoulder, but he did not dare to touch it. Yi Xian's sudden attack caught the old man and the young man by surprise. Of course, they were too confident and underestimated Yi Xian. The old man stared at Yi Xian. Let him go. Yi Xian smiled. I mean no harm. I just don't want you to disturb a senior of mine. That's all. The old man stared at Yi Xian calmly, but his eyes were filled with murderous intent. On the count of 3, if you don't let him go, the old man. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pushed his right hand forward lightly. The sword pierced half an inch into the young man's forehead and blood spurted out. Yi Xian turned around to look at the old man. He said with a smile, count them. Why don't you count? I'm listening. The old man looked at Yi Xian for a while, then said, you will pay for this. Yi Xian raised his sword again, this time deeper into the young man's forehead. The young man's body trembled. If it had gone any deeper he would have died. At this moment the old man's voice became completely silent. Yi Xian looked at the old man and smiled. Come on, continue. The old man stared at Yi Xian and said nothing. The young man in front of Yi Xian looked ferocious. Do you know who I am? Yi Xian turned to look at the young man. Then do you know who I am? The young man sneered. Is that so? I want to know who you are. Yi Xian grinned. Actually, I'm your father. The young man flared up with rage. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly spoke angrily. Shut the fuck up. One more word and I'll chop you up. The young man wanted to say something, but the old man not far away shook his head slightly, signaling him not to say anything. The young man said in a low voice, Uncle Yunxiao, I don't believe he dares to kill me. Yi Xian laughed and said, do you want to try? The young man was just about to speak when the old man called Yunxiao spoke abruptly. Young man, speak. What exactly do you want? Yi Xian smiled and said, nothing much, I just want you to wait. Is this okay? Yunxiao asked, that's it. Yi Xian nodded. That's it. Yunxiao was about to speak when the iron furnace not far away suddenly shook violently. Then a figure flew out. It was the old man from the smithy. The old man walked in front of Yi Xian with a long box in his hand. Yi Xian was slightly excited. It's done? The old man shook his head. There's still one more step. As he spoke, he suddenly looked at Yunxiao and Yunxiao. When he saw them, his face instantly turned cold. What are you doing here? The young man said, Third uncle, father asked me to invite you back. Go back? The old man sneered. Go back for what? Also, I'm no longer a Yun family member, nor am I your third uncle. You two hurry up and scram. The young man said in a low voice. Third uncle, you're also a Yun family member. The old man coldly said, didn't you hear what I said? The young man still wanted to say something, but Yunxiao suddenly said, Brother Yunxing, the patriarch said that if you don't want to go back, it's fine. However, the Yun family's treasure, the earth vein furnace, must be returned to the Yun family. Apart from that, the Yun family's forging technique must not be taught to outsiders, otherwise. The old man sneered. Otherwise what? Otherwise kill me. Yunxiao looked at Yunxing without saying anything. Yunxing suddenly looked at Yi Xian in front of him. He is my successor. If you have the ability, then kill him. Yi Xian's face darkened. Fuck, this old man wants to mess with me. Hearing Yunxing's words, Yun Xiao and Yun Xiao immediately looked at Yi Xian with unfriendly expressions. Yi Xian smiled. You two, do you have any objections? Yun Xiao coldly looked at Yi Xian. Finally he looked at Yun Xing. You're on your own. With that he turned and left with the young man. Yun Xing fell silent for a moment and then he looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. With that he left with Yi Xian. Under Yun Xing's lead, the two of them arrived before a teleportation formation. In next to no time the two of them vanished from sight. Around 10 minutes later, the two of them arrived beneath a waterfall. The waterfall was over 100 meters long and there was a small pool beneath it. What's this? Yi Xian asked. Yun Xing spoke indifferently. My Yun family opened up a geocentric spiritual spring all those years ago. This is the last step, the watering of the spiritual spring. When my Yun family left we took almost all of it with us. Now there shouldn't be much left. However, it's enough for us. As he spoke he tossed the long box in his hand into the pool. In next to no time the pool shook violently and rays of sword light shot out from the pool. Blood. At this moment Yun Xing looked at Yi Xian. 2 drops of blood. Yi Xian nodded. With a point of his finger 2 drops of blood flew into the pool. Bang. The entire pool shook violently all of a sudden. Yi Xian asked nervously, Senior, there shouldn't be a problem, right? Yun Xing replied calmly, What problem could there be? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. No problem. How could there be a problem, Senior? Yun Xing glanced at Yi Xian. You're the most cunning swordsman I've ever met. I'm curious. How did you become a swordsman with your personality? And you even became a sword immortal. Yi Xian said seriously, Talent. My master said that I'm the most talented in all of history. Your master said, Yun Xing almost cursed. As if recalling something he paused and said, The owner of that sword said that? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. My master said that I'm an exceptional sword Dao genius. One day the entire never-ending starfield will submit to my sword. Yi Xian will, stop. The old man suddenly waved his hand. Just pretend that the old man didn't ask. Just stop. Yi Xian was speechless. This continued for about 2 hours before Yun Xing suddenly waved his right hand. A sword with a scabbard suddenly flew out of the pool and landed steadily in front of him. Yun Xing turned to look at Yi Xian and handed the sword to Yi Xian. Take a look. Yi Xian quickly took the sword and unsheathed it. Buzz. A sword's hum suddenly rang through the sky. It was a sword. The sword in Yi Xian's hand was 3 feet long and 2 fingers wide. At first glance it looked like a very, very ordinary sword. Yi Xian looked at the scabbard. The scabbard was dark and there were some mysterious patterns around it. Apart from that, it also emitted a cold and gloomy aura. At this moment Yun Xing suddenly said, This sword only has the shape of your sword. It doesn't have a soul. However, for you now this sword should be just right. As for the scabbard, I forged it with frost iron. Both the sword and the scabbard are Saint grade and they are both supreme grade Saint grade. Supreme grade Saint grade. Yi Xian was moved. He knew that Saint grade was divided into low grade Saint grade, high grade Saint grade and supreme grade Saint grade. The scabbard of the sword realm was supreme grade Saint grade. It could be said that it was priceless. Yi Xian put away the sword and looked at Yun Xing. Senior, thank you. Yun Xing glanced at Yi Xian and said calmly, You're welcome. The old man is just a man of his word. Oh, if you really want to thank me, just don't look for the old man in the future. Then he turned and left. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, when will you teach me blacksmithing? Blacksmithing? Yun Xing turned to look at Yi Xian. When did the old man promise to teach you blacksmithing? Yi Xian said seriously, Sir, you told me earlier that I am your successor. Yun Xing blinked. You believe that? Yi Xian said, Of course. Yun Xing snorted coldly. The old man said it casually. Why would you believe it? Yi Xian said calmly. Senior said it casually. Those two took it seriously. Saying this he sighed softly. Sigh, it doesn't matter if Senior teaches me or not. I'm afraid that if I ruin Senior's reputation in the future, then I deserve to die 1,000 times. Yun Xing frowned. Ruin my reputation? How can you ruin my reputation? Yi Xian said seriously, Everyone knows that I'm Senior's disciple. If I forge something rubbish, won't Senior's reputation be ruined? Hearing this, Yun Xing's face darkened. He stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned and ran away. Yun Xing was silent for a moment, then he turned and left. Yi Xian returned to Dao Yi Academy. As soon as he returned to Dao Yi Academy, he was summoned by the first elder to Dao Yi Hall. Yi Xian was stunned when he entered the hall. There were two people in the hall. They were Yun Xiao and the young man. Yun Xiao was expressionless when he saw Yi Xian, but the young man's face was gloomy. The first elder glanced at Yi Xian. These two are from the Yun family in the heaven domain. I heard from Yun Xiao that you had some conflict with them? Conflict? Yi Xian was struck dumb. He was a little confused. What conflict? The first elder's eyes twitched. This guy is playing dumb again. Beside him, Yun Xiao cast a cold glance at Yi Xian. What conflict? He pointed at the young man nearby. Did you cause that wound between his eyebrows? He almost died at your hands. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, don't talk nonsense. When I sparred with this brother earlier, we were evenly matched. If it wasn't for Senior stopping us in time, I might have already been defeated by this brother. He then cupped his fists at the young man. Brother, you're powerful. I Yi Xian admire you. Hearing this, the young man was stunned. Not far away, Yun Zhao's face darkened. Chapter 378. Inside the hall, Yun Xiao stared at Yi Xian, his face extremely gloomy. The first elder suddenly smiled. So it's a sparring session. He looked at Yun Xiao. Brother Yun Xiao, it's inevitable for young people to have some conflicts in a sparring session. Yun Xiao said calmly, I'm so envious that you have such a genius in your academy. The first elder smiled. Not at all. This kid is stubborn and mischievous. I hope Brother Yun Xiao will forgive him if he has offended you. He looked at Yi Xian and said, You may leave. Yi Xian turned around and left. He had too many things to deal with at the moment. If it wasn't for the first elder, he wouldn't even bother with them. A quarter of an hour later, Yun Xiao and Yun Xiao left Dao Yi Academy. Outside the academy, the young man asked, Uncle Xiao, are we just going to let it go? Yun Xiao looked at the young man coldly. What else can I do? The young man said coldly, He almost killed me. Yun Xiao said calmly, He said he sparred with you and almost lost to you. What do you want me to say? Do you want me to tell him that you couldn't even take one move from him? The young man's face darkened. It was a sneak attack. If it wasn't a sneak attack, why would I? Yun Xiao shook his head. I've investigated this person. He's a sword immortal at such a young age. He's no ordinary person. He looked at the young man and said, Our top priority now is to report to our family about Yun Xing. As for this young man, we'll have plenty of chances to avenge him in the future. After he finished speaking, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. The young man hesitated for a moment. Then he glared in the direction of Dao Yi Academy and followed. Yi Xian arrived at the cultivation room of Dao Yi Academy. Dao Yi Academy had its own cultivation room. These rooms were reinforced by a formation. Not only were they sturdy, but they were also sealed to protect one's life. However, one had to pay a certain amount of purple fire crystals. After handing over the purple fire crystals, Yi Xian entered a cultivation room. Cultivation. What he needed to do now was to fuse the two sword skills. He was already very familiar with the sword skill determining life and death. As for the other sword skill, he had some understanding, but it was not thorough enough. Could be said that, one sword to decide life and death, was a kind of sword principle belief, a kind of momentum, and the other sword technique was a kind of technique, a pure technique. If the two of them were combined, the power would definitely not be weak. In the following time, Yi Xian started. He cultivated crazily. He unsheathed his sword. He repeated the same action every day, and that was to draw his sword. He drew his sword madly, and what he needed to do was to grasp the explosive point of the moment he drew his sword. At first it was fine and the cultivation went smoothly. But gradually Yi Xian found it difficult. Because he realized that these two sword skills weren't particularly difficult for him if he were to separate them. However, if he wanted to combine them, it would be extraordinarily difficult. Although it was difficult, Yi Xian was very clear that if he could successfully fuse these two sword skills, together with his current sword and scabbard, the power would be incomparably strong. He drew his sword madly. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. On the fourth day, Yi Xian couldn't remember how many times he had drawn his sword. Hard work paid off. Gradually he had some gains. This gain was that after adding the sword drawing technique, his sword determining life and death began to change. It became even stronger. However, these few days he had consumed a lot of energy. This was because every time he drew his sword it consumed a lot of energy. Fortunately, he had the purple fire crystals, so he had enough energy to sustain his crazy cultivation. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. In the cultivation room, Zhou Xian stood quietly. He held the sheathed sword in his left hand and was silent. After standing there for about 15 minutes, his right hand suddenly grasped the hilt of the sword and he drew it. Buzz! A sword chime suddenly resounded. As the sword chime resounded, the entire cultivation room was instantly shaken by the sword chime. Not only the cultivation room but the surrounding space had also cracked. However, Zhou Xian shook his head because it was still not enough. It was far from enough. There was still a lot of room for improvement in the explosive power of drawing the sword. However, it was very strenuous for him right now because he had to do it quickly, extremely quickly. Not only did it consume his mind, but it also consumed his physical strength. When he pulled out the sword just now, he discovered that his right arm had already split open. Not only that, but at this moment he felt as if his entire body had been hollowed out and was very weak. The consumption of this sword was too great. The true defensive Dharma state was not enough. He must reach the void-piercing realm. And to reach the void-piercing realm one must have a sword. Zhou Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and calculated his current financial situation. He currently had 1.6 million purple origin crystals and 11,000 purple fire crystals. If converted to purple origin crystals it would be 1 million. This should be enough. Thinking of this, Xian left the world prison pagoda. He didn't go to get his sword because he had more important things to do. Zhou Xian arrived at Dao Yi's hall. 15 minutes later he left Dao Yi's hall and entered the Violet Flame Pagoda. It wasn't long before Zhou Xian saw Xianxia, and Zhou Xian passed the 3 items he'd obtained from the Grand Elder to Xianxia. Xianxia nodded slightly. I'll reconstruct her body, but it will take some time. Come back in a month. Zhou Xian hesitated for a moment before he asked, will it be dangerous? Xianxia shook her head. It's not dangerous. However, reconstructing her body and coupled with the fact that her soul has been shattered, some problems might arise after she's resurrected. I'm not sure about these problems as well. Zhou Xian spoke in a low voice. No matter what, I'll be troubling you. Xianxia nodded slightly. Let's go. Come back in a month. When she spoke up to this point she seemed to have thought of something and added, be careful of that Jian Zizai from the 4th floor. He's not simple. Zhou Xian said, she probably can't attack me now, right? Xianxia chuckled, not now. However, don't activate the pagoda rashly. If you do, then the seal on the pagoda will weaken. At that time she might be able to do something to you. Activate the pagoda of prison. Zhou Xian laughed bitterly. He really didn't dare to activate the pagoda of prison as he pleased now. He was afraid. He was really quite afraid because there would be too much trouble once he activated the pagoda. A short while later, Zhou Xian left the underground and returned to Dao Yi Academy. Now he had to find a sword, a high-grade heaven rank sword. He could only go to 2 places to obtain a sword. The first was the Taihe Trading Company, which was the largest trading company in Dao Yi City. The other was the Immortal Sword Sect, which was the largest swordsman sect in the Northern Territory. The Taihe Trading Company? Zhou Xian rejected this thought because there was enmity between him and the Taihe Trading Company, so they would definitely do something to him if he went to look for them. The Immortal Sword Sect? That wouldn't work either. The Immortal Sword Sect wouldn't give him a sword. Steal it? Thinking of this, Zhou Xian hesitated. Steal it? That wasn't a good idea. After thinking for a while, Zhou Xian suddenly said, borrow it first, I'll return it later. When he finished speaking, he disappeared on the spot. In the pagoda of prison, a voice suddenly rang out. What a shameless person. P.S. Ask for a ticket. Chapter 379. The Immortal Sword Sect. The Immortal Sword Sect had a decisive position in the Northern Domain because there was only one sword cultivator sect in the entire Northern Domain. Swordsman sects had always been rare because swordsmen required great talent and a large amount of cultivation resources. Therefore, without the support of any faction, a person's achievements would be limited even if they were talented. And Zhou Xian had deeply felt the importance of money since he had started cultivating. Without enough money, it would be difficult to make any progress on the path of cultivation, especially for him. Every time he broke through, he would need to devour swords. Yi Xian arrived at the Immortal Sword Sect through the teleportation formation in Dao Yi City. The Immortal Sword Sect stood on top of a suspended mountain in the starry sky. The mountain was huge and hung upside down in the starry sky like a sword. Flying swords flew around the mountain from time to time. Majestic. This was Yi Xian's first impression of the Immortal Sword Sect. The Immortal Sword Sect was even more majestic than the Dao Yi Academy. Yi Xian didn't sneak into the Immortal Sword Sect. Instead, he openly walked towards the Immortal Sword Sect. Soon, an old man with a sword on his back appeared in front of him. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and asked, "Who are you?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "This junior is Yi Xian, an inner court student of the Dao Yi Academy. I am here to visit the sect master of the Immortal Sword Sect under the Grand Elder's order." The Dao Yi Academy. The old man frowned. "Are you from the Dao Yi Academy?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The old man asked, "Do you have proof?" Yi Xian took out a token. The old man nodded slightly at the sight of the token. "Wait a minute." With that, he turned and left. Yi Xian looked around and saw people flying on swords from time to time. These people were very powerful. Meanwhile, the old man from before appeared in front of Yi Xian again and he said, "Come with me." Just like that, Yi Xian followed the old man into the Immortal Sword Sect. The interior of the Immortal Sword Sect was very spacious. There were very few buildings, only a few halls. Along the way, Yi Xian saw many swordsmen. He noticed that these swordsmen were very cold, very cold. He greeted these swordsmen, but they only glanced at him and did not respond. Without a doubt, the Immortal Sword Sect was much more powerful than the Ashen Sword Sect, but compared to the Ashen Sword Sect, it lacked a trace of humanity. Soon Yi Xian and the old man entered the hall. Inside the hall, Yi Xian saw a middle-aged man. This person was none other than the sect master of the Immortal Sword Sect, Li Qing. Li Qing glanced at Yi Xian. "You are Yi Xian?" Yi Xian was stunned. This person had heard of him? Li Qing said lightly, "I heard that you are the strongest swordsman in the Dao Yi Academy." Yi Xian smiled. No, it's just a." Li Qing glanced at Yi Xian. "State your purpose." Yi Xian smiled. "The Grand Elder asked this junior to buy some heaven-class swords from your sect." "Heaven-class swords?" Li Qing frowned. "What does your Dao Yi Academy need heaven-class swords for?" Yi Xian said, "To make a sword array." Li Qing looked at Yi Xian. "It should be for you." Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "Yes." Li Qing shook his head. "My Immortal Sword Sect has a lot of heaven-class swords, but they are not for sale. You can go back." Yi Xian thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then this junior will take his leave." With that, he turned around and left. Inside the hall, Li Qing glanced at Yi Xian, who was leaving. "It is said that this person became a sword immortal at the age of 16. What do you think?" Below, the old man shook his head. "It should be impossible, but this person's talent and battle prowess are certainly unquestionable, because he has already defeated one of the 4 monstrous geniuses of the inner courtyard, Nanshan, and Nanshan has already reached the origin realm." Li Qing nodded. "Indeed, not bad. Unfortunately, he joined the Dao Yi Academy." The old man smiled. "It is indeed a bit of a pity. If he was in my Immortal Sword Sect with our full support, it would not be difficult for him to become a great sword immortal in 2 years." Li Qing nodded. "Tell the people of the Immortal Weapon Pavilion to be careful. Yi Xian is a bit shameless. He should not give up so easily." The old man smiled. "It is impossible for him to steal or rob, right?" Li Qing said, "Just be careful." At this moment, a man suddenly walked into the hall. The man slightly bowed to the 2. "Sect Master, there is a man in the Immortal Sword City who has set up an arena, saying that if you defeat him, you can obtain 100,000 purple origin crystals." Li Qing frowned. "Is it that Yi Xian?" The man nodded. "Yes." Li Qing and the old man looked at each other. The latter said in a deep voice, "What the hell is this guy doing?" Immortal Sword City. At this moment, the city was very lively because someone had set up an arena, and it was a swordsman who was not from the Immortal Sword Sect. On an arena, Yi Xian stood quietly. There were 2 banners on the left and right sides of the arena. The one on the left was written, "Northern Region's #1 Swordsman," and the one on the right was written, "If you are not convinced, come and fight." Arrogant. Very arrogant. Soon, many swordsmen from the immortal sword sect heard the noise and rushed over. A man flew to the arena. He glanced at Zhou Xian and sneered, "What a big tone, claiming to be the northern region's #1 swordsman. Come, let me fight you." Zhou Xian said lightly, "If you want to challenge me, sure, but according to the rules, first take out a heaven-grade sword. If you lose, the sword will belong to me. If I lose, I will give you 100,000 purple origin crystals." The man's face was a little ugly. "I don't have a sword." Zhou Xian said angrily, "If you don't have a sword, why are you hitting the hammer?" Next. The man said angrily, "This father wants to hit you. The man's voice suddenly stopped because a sword was pointed at his eyebrows. The surroundings suddenly quietened down. Zhou Xian put away his sword. "Go down." The man did not say anything. He turned around and ran. In this way, after Zhou Xian waited for about half a quarter of an hour, a sword-wielding swordsman suddenly flew to the arena. Zhou Xian said lightly, "Do you know the rules?" The swordsman glanced at Zhou Xian. "Yes." After saying that, he flicked his finger and a sword flew to the side. "A heaven-grade sword." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Make your move." The swordsman suddenly disappeared, and in the next moment, a sword light directly chopped down at Zhou Xian's head. Quick sword strike. However, this sword abruptly stopped a few inches away from Zhou Xian's head, because the sword in Zhou Xian's hand was already at the swordsman's throat. He lost. The swordsman stared at Zhou Xian, his eyes solemn. Zhou Xian put away his sword and said with a smile, "Next." The swordsman glanced at Zhou Xian, then turned around and left. Zhou Xian put away the heaven-grade sword at his side. His heart was filled with joy. In fact, he knew very well that being so high-profile, it was easy to be beaten. However, he had no other choice but to resort to such a method. If he wanted to break through now, he must get his hands on a sword, but he certainly could not go to Tai-He Commerce. The immortal sword sect did not want to sell. He could only use this method to obtain a sword. Soon another man leaped onto the stage. In this way, about an hour later, Zhou Xian had obtained 7 heaven-grade swords. Gradually, the number of people on the arena decreased. Because everyone found that Zhou Xian's strength was very strong, the people on the arena could not take a single sword strike from Zhou Xian. At this moment, a sword cry suddenly sounded from the distant sky, followed by a sword light falling on the arena. It was a young man about 20 years old, wearing a white robe, carrying a sword case on his back, and on the left side of his chest, there was a small, immortal character. "It's the immortal sword sect," someone exclaimed in the field. "The immortal sword sect." The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. The white-robed man looked at Zhou Xian. "You're from Dao Yi Academy." Zhou Xian nodded. "Dao Yi Academy." The white-robed man glanced at the 2 banners of Zhou Xian. "I'll make you swallow them later." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Where's the sword?" The white-robed man waved his right hand. A heaven-grade sword fell to the side. Zhou Xian smiled slightly. "Make your move." The white-robed man shook his head. He waved his right hand again and 4 heaven-grade swords fell to the side. A total of 5 swords. The white-robed man looked at Zhou Xian. "Do you dare to block it?" Zhou Xian said with a smile, "How?" The white-robed man said indifferently, "If I lose, these 5 swords are yours. If you lose, not only will you swallow the 2 banners, but you will also kneel at the foot of the mountain of the immortal sword sect for 3 days and 3 nights. Do you dare?" Zhou Xian smiled. "All right." The white-robed man glanced at Zhou Xian. "You're very confident." As soon as he finished speaking, a sword suddenly soared into the sky from the sheath on his back. The sword pierced the sky, and in the next moment, a sword chi shot down from the sky, heading straight for Zhou Xian on the arena. Sword Sovereign. The moment the white-robed man drew his sword, a powerful sword aura swept across the arena. Sword Sovereign's aura. It was a swift strike. However, Zhou Xian was even swifter. Before the sword chi descended onto the arena, Zhou Xian had already appeared in front of the white-robed man. At the same time, his sword was pressed firmly against the white-robed man's throat. "I lost?" The surroundings were deathly silent. The white-robed man stared fixedly at Zhou Xian as he stood before Zhou Xian. "You're a sword immortal." Zhou Xian grinned. He put his sword away and then he walked over to the side and put away those 5 swords. Coupled with the 7 swords from before, he now had a total of 12 heaven-rank swords. Moreover, he already had around 10 heaven-rank swords, so he had over 20 now. But it wasn't enough. It was far from enough. Presently, the more heaven-rank swords he had, the better it was for him. The white-robed man glanced at Zhou Xian and then he turned around and left. Somewhere in the shadows, the immortal sword sect master, Li Qing, gazed at Zhou Xian on the arena, and no one knew what he was thinking. Beside Li Qing stood an old man, and the old man spoke in a low voice. This person's combat strength is extraordinary. Even those elite disciples might not be able to defeat him. Li Qing's face was expressionless. His objective should be the swords. The old man nodded. I didn't expect him to use such a method to get the swords. At this point he paused slightly and continued, what should we do next? We can't just ignore it. If we don't, then the immortal sword sect will become a laughingstock in the northern territory. Li Qing spoke indifferently. Don't those fellows from the inner sect usually fight very fiercely? Now it's time for them to show themselves. The old man thought for a moment and then he said, right, internal strife isn't much of a skill. Now it's time for them to show themselves. With that he turned around and left. 2 hours later, nearly 100 swordsmen from the Immortal Sword Sect suddenly descended the mountain and headed straight for Immortal Sword City. Chapter 380. After learning that Zhou Xian had set up an arena in the Immortal Sword City, all the disciples of the Immortal Sword Sect were furious. Because in the eyes of the Immortal Sword Sect, Zhou Xian's action was undoubtedly a provocation to the entire Immortal Sword Sect. Who didn't know that the Immortal Sword Sect was the #1 swordsman sect in the northern region? Zhou Xian had set up an arena in the territory of the Immortal Sword Sect and called himself the #1 swordsman in the northern region. This was a blatant provocation to the Immortal Sword Sect. How could the Immortal Sword Sect tolerate this? Soon, the disciples of the Immortal Sword Sect entered the Immortal Sword City. Dao Yi Academy. In the Dao Yi Palace, the Great Elder was discussing something with everyone. At this moment, a man in black quietly appeared beside the Great Elder. The man in black said something and the Great Elder suddenly stood up. He went to the Immortal Sword City to challenge the Immortal Sword Sect? In the palace, everyone looked at the Great Elder, somewhat confused. The man in black nodded slightly. It has already begun. The Great Elder frowned. What the hell is this guy doing? Not far away an old man asked. What's wrong? The Great Elder said in a deep voice. Zhou Xian went to the Immortal Sword City. He set up an arena and called himself the #1 swordsman in the northern region. Hearing this, the old man who spoke frowned. He went to challenge the Immortal Sword Sect? The Great Elder shook his head. He didn't go to challenge the Immortal Sword Sect. He probably went to get the sword. Saying this, he shook his head and sighed. This guy is really not easy to deal with, the old man said in a deep voice. Great Elder, Zhou Xian is really restless. Ever since he entered our Dao Yi Academy, this kind of thing has been happening more and more. I'm afraid he will implicate our Dao Yi Academy in the future. Hearing this, the palace quieted down. Zhou Xian. Everyone acknowledged Zhou Xian's talent, but Zhou Xian's ability to cause trouble was really terrifying. Too restless. A beautiful woman at the side suddenly smiled and said, actually, there are pros and cons to this. Everyone looked at the beautiful woman. The beautiful woman smiled and said, why don't you all think about it? If he wants to cause trouble, why can he cause trouble? Because he was capable. Moreover, when this person entered the inner court, it was Nanshan who provoked him first, and that's why he started fighting with Nanshan. Besides Nanshan, did any of you see him provoking anyone else? Not only that, according to what I know, there are more than 10 people following him now. Even Ming Kuan, one of the 4 monstrous geniuses, is following him. This proves that he has a certain amount of charisma. Not far away, the old man smiled bitterly. Instructor Hui Exen, have you ever thought that if he continues to cause trouble outside, he will make many enemies for our Dao Yi Academy? The teacher named Hui Exen said calmly, everyone forgive me for being blunt. Students who are capable of causing trouble are not scary. The scary ones are the students of Dao Yi Academy who haven't caused any trouble. Hearing this, everyone's expression turned serious. Students who didn't cause any trouble. This meant that there was no one in the academy. Every single power had to be supported by formidable resources and reserves, but the younger generation had to have people. If there was no one in the younger generation, then they wouldn't be able to speak with confidence. Because the younger generation represented the future. That was why talents were the most important in this era. No one within the hall spoke and all of them looked at the Grand Elder. The dean wasn't here, so the Grand Elder made all the decisions. The Grand Elder fell silent for a short while before he said, "Let's wait and see for now." The old man asked, "Shouldn't we stop him?" The Grand Elder spoke indifferently, "Stop him? How? Now even if that kid is willing to leave, the Immortal Sword sect won't let the matter go." As he spoke he stood up, "Let's go and have a look." Immortal Sword City. The crowd below the arena parted, and over 100 disciples of the Immortal Sword sect arrived before the arena. Xian's eyelids twitched when he saw so many disciples of the Immortal Sword sect. This matter is getting out of hand. 2 men and a woman walked up the arena. All of them were young, around the age of 20. The 3 swords of the north. Suddenly someone exclaimed, "It's the 3 sword immortals of the north." The 3 sword immortals of the north. There were many relatively famous people amongst the younger generation of the north, and the 3 sword immortals of the north were 3 of them. Because all 3 of them were sword immortals and they were only 20 years old. The man in the lead glanced at the 2 banners of Xian, and then he looked at Xian. "You're talking big." Xian smiled embarrassedly. "I presume the 3 of you are the monstrous geniuses of the Immortal Sword sect. May I know your name?" The man in the lead shook his head. "You're not qualified to know my name." Xian smiled. "Then let's begin? Which one of you will come first? Or should I say all at once? Together?" The crowd instantly went into an uproar when they heard Xian. "Who does he think he is? All at once? Is he crazy? How arrogant. I've never seen such an arrogant person in my entire life. He's ignorant." In the arena, the faces of the 3 turned pale when they heard what Xian had said. The man in the lead smiled and he shook his head slightly. "1 against 3? You know that we won't fight 3 against 1, but you still say that. You're so scheming." With that he waved his right hand and 10 swords appeared at the side of the ring. They were all heaven stage. The man in the lead looked at Xian. "I'll raise the stakes. If you lose you'll have to swallow these 2 banners. Not only that, you'll have to kneel at the foot of the mountain of the Immortal Sword sect for a month." Xian looked at the 3 swords and then he shook his head. "Too little. I'm losing. After all, if you lose you'll only lose 10 swords, but if I lose I'll be humiliated." The man said indifferently, "Then how many do you want?" Xian raised 3 fingers. 30. "If I lose, not only will I swallow these banners, I'll also kneel at the foot of the Immortal Sword sect for a year." Kneel for a year. Hearing this, the man in front of Xian narrowed his eyes. "It seems that you're very confident in yourself." Xian smiled. "Do you want to bet?" The man fell silent. He didn't have 30 heaven stage swords. As if he thought of something, he turned to look at the woman and the man beside him. The 2 of them fell silent for a moment, and then they pointed with their fingers and 20 heaven stage swords appeared near the ring. A total of 30 heaven stage swords. In the darkness far away, the old man beside Li Qing smiled slightly. When facing an external enemy they can unite. Sure. Li Qing also nodded slightly. People on the same side could compete with each other and even fight amongst themselves, but if they fought against an external enemy and didn't unite, then even if they were monstrous geniuses, the sect wouldn't want such people. In the distant ring, the man in front of Xian looked at Xian. "Let's begin." Xian smiled. "Let's begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the man opened his palm, and a sword suddenly condensed into form in his palm. At the same time, a strand of sword intent suddenly appeared around the ring. A sword immortal. The surroundings instantly seethed with excitement when they witnessed this scene. In the arena, Xian nodded slightly as well. Based on the aura and sword intent of the man before him, he was very strong indeed. Xian didn't act carelessly and a sword chest appeared behind him. At the same time, a sword appeared in his hand. Harangaya. He didn't dare act carelessly against the man before him. The man suddenly took a step forward and his figure instantly became ethereal. Meanwhile, Xian's expression changed abruptly because a few rays of light had appeared in front of him. These rays of light were as small as the tips of needles, and all of them were aimed at his vital points. Xian suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and the sword in his hand swiftly slashed forward. It was just a simple slash. As soon as this slash was executed, countless strands of the energy of the earth sprayed out from the sword. Bang! The arena beneath their feet instantly collapsed into pieces. At the same time, two figures retreated explosively, and it was Yi Xian and the man. The battlefield between them had grown larger. The two of them stopped at almost the same time. The moment Yi Xian stopped, several swords suddenly flew out from the sword case on his back. They were extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of the man. The man's expression changed drastically when he saw these swords, and he didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest. He swiftly pressed his palms forward, and then countless swords of energy instantly shot out from his palms. Bang! Countless strands of sword energy shot towards the surroundings. The spectators in the surroundings were horrified, and they retreated repeatedly. They didn't dare approach the two of them at all. Right amidst this expanse of sword energy, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up and arrived above the man. In the next moment, a strand of sword energy slashed down at an extremely swift speed. The man's pupils constricted slightly when he witnessed this scene. In the next moment, he suddenly pressed his palms together, and then two enormous swords suddenly appeared above him. At the same time, the two enormous swords clamped down on Yi Xian's attack. However, the ground beneath his feet instantly collapsed. This clearly showed how terrifying this attack was. However, the man had still forcefully resisted this attack. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had retreated over 10 m back, but the sword in his hand had changed. The sword of earth had transformed into the sword of space. At the moment the swords changed, the expressions of Li Qing and the man who were hiding in the shadows below had instantly changed drastically. The man's expression instantly changed drastically as well. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had appeared in front of him once more. At the same time, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down once more. There weren't any flashy movements, and it was just a simple attack. The man stomped his right foot on the ground, pressed his palms together, and then pulled them apart. As soon as he did this, a ray of light shot out from the center of his brows. Boom! A sword howl resounded through the sky. Bang! A figure instantly retreated explosively. It was exactly Yi Xian. At the instant Yi Xian retreated, the man heaved a sigh of relief in his heart, and he was just about to follow up with another attack. However, a few swords suddenly flashed out from the space around him. Void flash. These swords had appeared without any warning, and the man hadn't expected that so many swords would suddenly appear. He was stunned for a moment, and by the time he recovered from his shock, those swords had already arrived at all the vital points on his body. But it didn't take long for all these swords to vanish, and no one was able to see them clearly. In the arena, the man was slightly dazed. Li Qing and the man who were hiding in the shadows had slightly gloomy expressions. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was in the arena, suddenly cupped his fists at the man and said with a smile, as expected of the three sword immortals of the northern region, "I, Yi Xian, am impressed. How about we call it a draw today?" The man was stunned, and so were Li Qing and the man below. Meanwhile, Yi Xian put away the 30 swords and smiled. "The immortal sword sect is amazing. I, Yi Xian, admire you. If I have the chance in the future, I'll come and seek guidance from the seniors of the immortal sword sect. Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The crowd was speechless. Chapter 381. In the Immortal Sword City, everyone looked at each other. Was it a draw? In the arena, the man watched Yi Xian leave in silence. On the other side, the man and the woman were also silent, because they knew that Yi Xian held back. Not only did he hold back, but he also saved the face of the Immortal Sword Sect. One must know that if Yi Xian really trampled on the man, he would not only lose the man's face, but also the face of the entire Immortal Sword Sect. But Yi Xian did not do so. At this time, the man who fought with Yi Xian suddenly said, "He is very strong, but he has not used his full strength." After saying that, he turned and left. In the Immortal Sword City, the crowd also gradually dispersed. Regarding the tie between Yi Xian and the man, everyone could still accept it as long as the Immortal Sword Sect did not lose. As soon as Yi Xian left the Immortal Sword City, Li Qing and an old man appeared in front of him. Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Greetings, seniors." Seeing this, the two secretly nodded in their hearts. Li Qing glanced at Yi Xian. "You came here for the sword?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Yes. There are no swords in the academy, and I have some grudges with the Taihe Chamber of Commerce, so I have no choice but to come here." If I have offended you, I hope Sect Master Li can forgive me. Li Qing was silent for a moment, and then he bent his finger and a storage ring fell in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at it, and inside the storage ring, there were 12 heaven stage swords and they were all high grade. Yi Xian looked at Li Qing with some confusion. This is... Li Qing said, thank you for holding back. If you have time next time, you can come to the Immortal Sword Sect to exchange with them. After saying that, he turned and left. In the same place, Yi Xian smiled slightly, put away the storage ring and disappeared at the end of the sky on his sword. In the dark, the Great Elder and the others nodded as they watched Yi Xian leave. Next to the Great Elder, an old man softly said, this guy? Not only is he extremely talented, he is also extremely thick-skinned. He also knows when to stop. After causing such a ruckus, not only did the Immortal Sword Sect not view him as an enemy, they are instead grateful to him. At this point he looked at the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder said, let's go back. Soon everyone left. Yi Xian returned to the Dao Yi Academy. At this moment the Xiu men had grown to 15 members, while there were less than 40 students in the inner yard. After returning to the inner yard, Yi Xian began to cultivate. Break through to the void-piercing realm. Right now he clearly felt that his realm was not high enough. This was because some powerful sword techniques required the support of one's realm. Right now he had close to 70 heaven-grade swords. 70 heaven-grade swords. Yi Xian entered a cultivation room, sat cross-legged on the ground, and took out all the heaven-grade swords he had. Yi Xian took a deep breath and then he suddenly stabbed a sword into his body. Devour. Devour madly. In the cultivation room, Yi Xian's aura started to grow stronger bit by bit. While Yi Xian was cultivating, an old man led 2 experts in golden black armor to Dao Yi City. The old man glanced at Dao Yi City, sneered coldly and then entered the city. A quarter of an hour later, the 3 of them arrived at the Dao Yi Academy. The Grand Elder was the one who received the 3 of them. In the Dao Yi Palace, the Grand Elder glanced at the 3 of them and said, you are? The old man smiled. Old man, the guest elder of the Dugu clan Mu Tian. I'm here on behalf of the Dugu clan. The Grand Elder's face changed slightly. Is it the Dugu clan from the Heaven region? The old man nodded. Yes. The Grand Elder's face became slightly solemn. A short while later the Grand Elder said, may I know why you're here? The old man smiled. The Dugu clan would like to ask for 2 people from your academy. 2 people? The Grand Elder frowned. Who are they? The old man looked the Grand Elder in the eye. Yi Xian and Yi Ling. The Grand Elder was stunned when he heard that. A short while later he spoke in a low voice. What do you mean? Mu Tian spoke in a low voice. Grand Elder, this is a scandal of the Dugu clan, so I won't dwell on it. I'm here to take them back with me. The Grand Elder spoke in a low voice. They're from the Dugu clan? Mu Tian laughed coldly. Of course not. He cupped his fists. Grand Elder, please hand them over to me so that the old man can take them back. The Grand Elder spoke solemnly. They're students of the Dao Yi Academy. Mu Tian's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, Grand Elder? The Grand Elder laughed. If they're willing to go back with you, the Dao Yi Academy will not stop them. They have absolute freedom. But if he doesn't want to leave, my Dao Yi Academy won't force him and his sister to leave. Mu Tian laughed coldly. Grand Elder, is the Dao Yi Academy going to meddle in the Dugu clan's affairs? The Grand Elder shook his head. I'm not interested in the Dugu clan's affairs. I just hope that you understand that they're students of the Dao Yi Academy, that's all. Mu Tian stared at the Grand Elder. So, the Dao Yi Academy is not willing to hand them over? The Grand Elder's face turned cold. What? Are you going to snatch them by force? Mu Tian's expression turned savage. If this was the era of Dao Yi Mu, the Dugu clan might be wary of the Dao Yi Academy. But now, the old man, if the Dao Yi Academy does not hand them over, the Dao Yi Academy will regret it for life. After that he turned to leave. Inside the hall, the Grand Elder's expression was dark, not knowing what he was thinking. After a while he spoke, gather all the teachers. Very quickly the teachers of the Dao Yi Academy gathered in the Dao Yi Hall. Hand over the Yi Xian siblings? How can we do that? If the Dao Yi Academy hands them over, how are we going to establish ourselves in the northern region? We can't. If we hand over the Yi Xian siblings, The people of the northern region will laugh at our Dao Yi Academy. We can't do such a shameful thing. The Dugu clan is too domineering, they even have their hands in the northern region. They won't let this go. After a while, the hall quietened down and everyone looked at the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder smiled. It's rare for everyone to have such a unified opinion. As he spoke, he looked out of the hall. But this time I'm afraid the Dugu clan won't let this matter go. Inform the dean. Below, an old man said in a low voice, "Is it that serious?" The Grand Elder smiled bitterly. "It's more than serious. You know too little about the Dugu clan. This clan has an important position in the heavenly region. Even when the Dao Yi Academy was at its peak, we might not be able to go against them." In the cultivation room, Zhou Xian had already devoured more than 20 swords, and his aura was slowly becoming stronger. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. 3 days later, Zhou Xian had already devoured more than 50 swords, and his aura was much stronger than before. On the 4th day, Zhou Xian suddenly opened his eyes in the cultivation room, and 2 balls of sword light shot out from his eyes. 2 bottomless cracks appeared on the wall in the distance. At the same time, a powerful aura spread out from Zhou Xian's body. Void-piercing realm. After devouring 67 heaven-grade swords, he finally reached the void-piercing realm. After reaching the void-piercing realm, Zhou Xian pressed his right hand forward lightly, and in an instant the space in his palms split open. Then countless dark energies surged out from the cracks in the space. Feeling the dark energies, Zhou Xian's expression became serious. He now understood why void-piercing realm experts were stronger than true defensive realm experts. The dark energies were really strong and even he felt his heart palpitate. Without thinking too much about it, after reaching the void-piercing realm, Zhou Xian continued to practice his sword skills. But now, every time he drew his sword, he did not feel that it was so strenuous. However, every time he drew the sword, it consumed a lot of energy. In his current situation, he could only draw it twice in an hour at most. As if thinking of something, Zhou Xian smiled. This sword skill is a fusion of 2 sword skills, so I have to give it a new name. What should I name it? As he said that, he fell into deep thought. After a moment, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. Let's just call it sword draw to determine life and death. After laughing, he suddenly thought of something. With a wave of his right hand, 2 swords appeared in front of him. Dark Azure Sword and the sword that Yunxing had forged for him. These 2 swords were Saint grade. Of course, the sword that Yunxing had forged for him was better. As for the sword that Yunxing had forged for him, he named it Spiritual Immortal. Previously, he had madly practiced sword draw to determine life and death, but he had used ordinary swords. He had never used this Spiritual Immortal, because he did not dare to use it. If he used this sword, he would definitely be able to destroy the entire cultivation room. Although he was very curious about the power of this sword combined with sword draw to determine life and death, he did not try it. Leave some suspense. Zhou Xian left the cultivation room and went to the underground world under the purple flame path. He had never forgotten about Yu Qi's matter. However, when he arrived at the hall, the door of the hall was tightly shut. Seeing this, Zhou Xian frowned. He was about to sneak in when the door suddenly opened and a voice was heard. "Come in." It was Yanjia's voice. Zhou Xian hurriedly walked in. In front of Yanjia there was a long, fiery red table. A woman was lying on the table. This woman was Yu Qi. Yu Qi was lying there quietly. There was no aura coming from her body. Most importantly, she was completely naked at that moment. Seeing this, Zhou Xian looked at Yanjia. "Can't you put some clothes on her?" Yanjia glanced at Zhou Xian. Her body is still being molded. She cannot be touched by external objects. Hearing this, Zhou Xian nodded. "I see." At this moment, Yanjia said, "You came at the right time. I need your help with something." Zhou Xian hurriedly asked, "What is it?" Yanjia said, "Do you have the chaotic energy in your body?" Zhou Xian was slightly stunned. "How do you know?" Yanjia said, "What do you think?" Zhou Xian smiled. He had almost forgotten that Yanjia was originally from the prison pagoda. Yanjia pointed at Yu Qi. "Use your chaotic energy to nourish her body." Zhou Xian said, "Put the chaotic energy in her body?" Yanjia nodded. "She has no consciousness yet. After you put the chaotic energy in her body, you need to guide it to nourish her body." Saying this, she looked at Zhou Xian. "During this process, you need to touch her entire body. You won't have any bad thoughts, right?" Yi Xian. Chapter 382. He touched his entire body. Yi Xian stood there in a daze for a long time. In the end he looked at Xianxia and said, "Senior can do this for me, right?" Xianxia looked at Yi Xian and said, "Yes, but your chaotic qi is a godly item. Don't you feel at ease leaving it to me?" Yi Xian smiled and waved his right hand. The strand of chaotic qi appeared in front of Xianxia before he turned and retreated to the side. Xianxia glanced at Yi Xian and did not say anything else as he started to control the chaotic qi to help Yu Qi nourish her body. Yi Xian waited silently by the side. Looking at Yu Qi in the distance, Yi Xian thought of the Azure world and the Azure Sword sect. Time slowly passed. Roughly 2 days later, Yu Qi suddenly opened her eyes and Yi Xian hurriedly walked over. Yu Qi's eyes were somewhat dazed and Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Master Yu?" Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian and said, "You are?" Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression darkened and he turned to look at Xianxia. The latter said, "Her body and soul have just fused and her memories have not fully recovered yet. Give her some time." Yi Xian nodded and then looked at Yu Qi and smiled. "Don't you remember me?" Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian and frowned slightly and said, "I have a slight impression." Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's fine. Think about it in the future." At this moment, Yu Qi looked at her body and found that she was completely naked. Her frown deepened and then she looked at Yi Xian and asked, "Did you take it off?" Yi Xian hurriedly waved his hand and said, No, it was the senior beside you who took it off. She saved you." Yu Qi looked at Xianxia who was nearby and then she stood up. Yi Xian hurriedly turned around and said, "Master Yu, put on some clothes first." Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian and said, "You've seen everything anyway, haven't you?" Yi Xian was speechless. Yu Qi bowed slightly towards Xianxia. "Thank you." Xianxia asked, "You can remember some things, right?" Yu Qi nodded. Xianxia nodded. "Right now your physical body and soul have just fused. You can't recover your strength for the time being. You can consider recovering your strength after your physical body and soul have completely fused. Do you understand?" Yu Qi nodded, then turned to look at Yi Xian. "Give me some clothes." Yi Xian hurriedly withdrew a robe and draped it over Yu Qi. He hesitated for a moment before he said, "You really don't remember me?" Yu Qi glanced at him but did not say anything. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "It's nothing. I'll think about it slowly in the future." With that he looked at Xianxia who was not far away. "Senior, I want her to stay here temporarily." The current Yu Qi did not have any strength at all. If they followed him back to the surface, it would undoubtedly be extremely dangerous. Xianxia replied, "It's up to her." Yi Xian turned to look at Yu Qi. "It's quite dangerous outside now. You should stay here and slowly recover your strength. Is that all right?" Yu Qi was silent for a moment before she said, "How is Pale Sword Sect?" Yi Xian softly said, "The Realm Defense Alliance has been destroyed. Uncle Master Jian Xian, Sect Master, Uncle Master Zhang Tai and the others have all died." Yu Qi was silent. Yi Xian softly said, "Uncle Master Zhou Xian and Uncle Master Gu are still alive. Pale Sword Sect will only grow stronger and stronger in the future." Yu Qi shook her head slightly before she softly said, "Go back." Yi Xian was silent for a while before he turned to leave. When he reached the entrance of the hall he suddenly stopped. "Are you blaming me?" Yu Qi did not reply. Yi Xian waited for a while but did not receive a reply. He left the hall. Inside the hall, Xianxia suddenly said, "He cares a lot about you." Yu Qi softly said, "I don't blame him." Xianxia asked, "Then why didn't you tell him directly?" Yu Qi said, "I was thinking about something and my mind wandered." Xianxia, the Grand Elder, found Yi Xian the moment he left the underground. Something happened to the old man in the smithy. "Yinsheng?" Yi Xian frowned. "What happened?" The Grand Elder said in a low voice, "There was a huge battle in Daoyi City and the smithy was destroyed." As he spoke he looked at Yi Xian. "This should be an internal matter of the Yun family. You won't want to interfere, right?" Yi Xian was taken aback. "Of course not." The Grand Elder softly said, "Because of that supreme treasure many people are coveting you. Don't get involved in this mess." Yi Xian nodded. "Understood." The Grand Elder nodded. "Do you know the Duga family?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Never heard of it." The Grand Elder looked at Yi Xian but did not speak. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I really haven't heard of it. The Grand Elder hesitated, then said, It's a large family from the Heaven Domain. Anyway, before the dean comes back, try not to leave the academy. Xian said in a low voice, Is someone trying to mess with me again? The Grand Elder glanced at him. You try to keep a low profile for now. As he spoke, he turned and left. Xian was silent for a moment, then turned and disappeared. Soon Xian came to Dao Yi City. When he came to the smithy again, it was gone. Something happened. Xian's face darkened. He looked around, and at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Yunxing. Xian was about to speak, but Yunxing grabbed him and disappeared. Outside Dao Yi City, Yunxing brought Xian to a deep mountain under a waterfall. As soon as they landed, Yunxing sat on the ground. Xian's face changed because he found that Yunxing was seriously injured. Xian said in a low voice, Senior. Yunxing glanced at Xian. Do you want to forge weapons? Xian hesitated, then said, A little. Yunxing suddenly said angrily, What do you mean a little? Xian hurriedly said, I mean, is it profitable to forge weapons? Yunxing said angrily, Nonsense, in the Heaven Domain being a blacksmith is the most honorable profession and also the richest one. Do you think it's profitable? Xian hurriedly said, Yes, I really want to be a blacksmith, really. Yunxing let out a low sigh. He looked at Xian with a complicated look in his eyes. Xian said, Senior, take care of your wounds first. Yunxing shook his head, I don't have that much time. Xian was about to speak, but Yunxing suddenly looked at him, took out a fist-sized black seal and put it in front of him. This seal contains my Yun family's inheritance of blacksmithing as well as a treasure of my Yun family. Now I give it to you. Xian said in a low voice, Senior, what are you doing? Yunxing shook his head. All these years I've been looking for a successor, hoping to leave my lifelong knowledge, but I haven't been able to find one. Saying this, he looked at Xian. I didn't expect that my lifelong inheritance would be passed on to you. Xian smiled bitterly. Senior, do you look down on me a little? Yunxing said indifferently, You're not particularly suitable for blacksmithing, but if you really like blacksmithing, you can learn diligently and your achievements in blacksmithing will not be low in the future. Xian said in a low voice, Senior, let's put the matter of blacksmithing aside for now. You take care of your wounds first. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared not far in front of the two. Xian knew this old man. It was Yunxiao who had left earlier. Behind Yunxiao there were two other old men. Yunxiao glanced coldly at Yunxing and sneered, I knew you would appear in the smithy again. Saying this, he glanced at Xian and his expression was cold. We meet again. Xian looked at Yunxing and the latter said in a low voice, I'll hold them back, you go back to Dao Yi Academy. Hold them back. In the distance Yunxiao sneered, Yunxing, can you hold them back? Yunxing ignored Yunxiao and looked at Xian and said angrily, What are you waiting for? Xian hesitated for a moment and then said, Senior, actually I'm very good at fighting. Fight my ass. Yunxing said angrily, Can you beat 3 Origin Realm experts at once? Xian thought about it. Perhaps I can try. Yunxing. Xian turned around and walked towards Yunxiao and the other two nearby. Can you give me Xian some face? Yunxiao sneered, Give you face? At this moment Xian, who was in front of him, suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, Xian was already in front of him. Yunxiao's expression changed drastically, but he reacted extremely quickly, and a powerful aura swept out from his body. At this moment Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. A single strike to decide life and death. Boom. As the sword fell, Yunxiao was knocked several hundred meters away. Yunxing, who was about to act, was stunned when he saw this. In the distance Yunxiao was also stunned. So powerful? Xian continued to walk towards Yunxiao and the other two. You three come at me together. Otherwise it'll be too easy. Yunxiao was infuriated when he heard that. How arrogant of you. With that he suddenly disappeared. In the next moment a powerful force shot towards Xian. At this moment Xian stopped. Suddenly a flying sword flashed through the air. Something seemed to have been ripped apart. A moment later the surroundings fell silent. Yunxiao stopped around 3 meters away from Xian, and there was a sword pressed against his forehead. A dark red sword. The dark blue sword. At this moment Zhou Xian was rather surprised because this was the first time he had used the dark blue sword. He had never thought that the Saint-tier dark blue sword would be so fast. It was so fast that even an Origin Realm expert would not be able to react in time. It was too fast. Not far away, Yunsheng's face was also solemn. Zhou Xian's strength had somewhat exceeded his expectations. As if he had thought of something, he glanced at Zhou Xian and the expression in his eyes changed slightly. Yun Shao stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. At that moment he was extremely shocked because he had never thought that Zhou Xian would be so good at fighting. Even he could not fight back at all. He was too much of a monster. Zhou Xian smiled. If I let you go, will you still come looking for trouble with me? Yun Shao said coldly, Zhou Xian, this is a matter of my Yun family. If you interfere, my Yun family will never let you go. Zhou Xian grinned. I have no intention of making enemies, but if anyone wants to become enemies with me, then I'll keep them company. With that he swung his sword. Swish. Yun Zhao's head flew into the air. Chapter 383. Killed. Behind Zhou Xian, Yunsheng was dumbfounded. Killed just like that? The other two Origin Realm experts were stunned as well. They never thought that Zhou Xian would directly kill them. They were representing the Yun family. However, at this moment Zhou Xian suddenly disappeared. The two remaining Origin Realm experts' expressions changed drastically as they hurriedly attacked. 1 against 2. Roughly half an hour later, the surroundings fell silent. 3 corpses lay in front of Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian stood before the 3 corpses with his eyes closed. He was currently absorbing the energy of the 3 corpses with his netherworld ring. In the distance, Yunsheng looked at Zhou Xian sternly. Zhou Xian's battle prowess had greatly exceeded his expectations. After a long while, Zhou Xian put away the ethereal execution ring, and then put away the storage rings of Yun Shao and the other 2. There were more than 1,000,000 purple origin crystals in the storage rings. There were also over 30 heaven-ranked treasures, but there wasn't a single saint-ranked treasure. Do you know what you've done? At this moment Yunsheng suddenly spoke up. Zhou Xian smiled. Senior, are you trying to say that the Yun family won't let me off because I killed a member of the Yun family? Yunsheng nodded. The Yun family isn't as simple as you think. Zhou Xian said, that's exactly why I killed the 3 of them. Now who will know that I killed a member of the Yun family? He looked at Yunsheng. Senior, you won't tell on me, right? Yunsheng glanced at Zhou Xian but did not say anything. Zhou Xian walked in front of Yunsheng and smiled. Senior, do you want to return to the Dao Yi Academy with me or? Yunsheng shook his head. I won't be going back. He looked at Zhou Xian as he spoke. You'll stay here with me and learn the art of forging. Zhou Xian hurriedly bowed. Greetings, master. Yunsheng shook his head with a smile. You. Blacksmithing. In the following period of time, Zhou Xian followed Yunsheng to learn forging techniques every day. He studied very seriously because he knew that he would need a lot of swords in the future, and he didn't have the financial resources to buy all of them. Make it yourself. Yunsheng was also very satisfied with Zhou Xian. It should be said that Zhou Xian surprised him because Zhou Xian studied very hard, was very serious and absorbed very quickly. Therefore Yunsheng was more and more satisfied with Zhou Xian. The more Zhou Xian learned, the more excited he became. He realized that the path of forging was very interesting. Every time he saw something he forged, he would feel a sense of accomplishment. Hence Zhou Xian became even more attentive. At night, Zhou Xian returned to the Dao Yi Academy. As soon as he returned to the Dao Yi Academy, he was called to the Violet Flame Tower by Xiao Gu. In the cave, the people of the Xiu school had already arrived. There were a total of 13 people, all of whom were void-piercing realm experts. Among them, Ming Kun might have already reached the Origin Realm. Of course, this was just Zhou Xian's guess and he didn't ask. Zhou Xian looked at Xiao Gu. This guy gathered everyone together, so there must be something. Xiao Gu chuckled and said with some excitement, Brother Yi, something happened in our northern region recently. Have you heard about it? Zhou Xian asked, what is it? Xiao Gu said, a small world was discovered several 100,000 li south of here. It was just discovered. Small world? Zhou Xian frowned, and then, on the side, Ming Kun said with a smile, Brother Yi might not know, but if it was just discovered, it means that this small world has not been occupied by anyone, and the resources on it are unclaimed. Hearing this, Zhou Xian understood. As if thinking of something, he looked at Xiao Gu. Who discovered it? Xiao Gu said in a low voice. I don't know, but it should spread to all the major forces soon. So we have to go first. Yi Xian said, there must be many people who want such a good thing, right? Xiao Gu said with a smile. Of course there will be many people going this time. However, how much you can obtain from it will depend on your own ability. Brother Yi, are you interested in going? Yi Xian thought about it and said, go. Xiao Gu said with a smile. Okay, there's no time to lose, let's go immediately. Yi Xian said, are you not going to tell the Great Elder and the others? Xiao Gu said, I have already told the Great Elder. The Great Elder and the others don't object to this matter. They just want us to be careful and inform the inner court immediately if anything happens. Hearing this, Yi Xian sighed in his heart. It's good to have a backer. The Great Elder's meaning was that if they went there and couldn't win, they could inform the academy. But if they were independent cultivators and couldn't win, they could either run or die. The difference in treatment was too great. An hour later, the 13 of them set off. In the starry sky, the 13 of them sat on the star-cloud ship and headed straight for the newly discovered small world. In the room, Yi Xian was studying the forging technique that Yun Xing had passed on to him. Currently, he was already slightly engrossed in it. According to Yun Xing, the Tao of forging was broad and profound. If it was mastered to the extreme, the treasures created could destroy the heavens and the earth. Just like those treasures on the interstellar bounty list. According to what Yun Xing had said, some of these treasures were man-made. This caused Yi Xian to be even more curious about the origins of the prison pagoda. Was this prison pagoda man-made as well? Unfortunately, neither the gods on the second floor nor the fourth floor could answer his question. Even they didn't know which era this pagoda was from. No matter what, the Tao of forging had endless potential and infinite possibilities. A moment later, Yi Xian entered the prison pagoda. Inside the pagoda, Xiao Linger was sleeping soundly while hugging a spiritual fruit. On the first floor there were spiritual fruits everywhere. The only fun that Xiao Linger had now was planting spiritual fruits or strolling around from time to time. Next to Xiao Linger, there was a small, dream word. Dream Dao Law. Looking at this Dream Dao Law, Yi Xian fell silent. Dream Sword. This was a Dao Law sword that he had always wanted to condense. Previously, he didn't dare to try it because this Dao Law was too terrifying and he didn't have the ability to control it. Now he had reached the void-piercing realm. Therefore he wanted to give it a try. However, this still required the cooperation of the Dream Dao Law. Because if the other party didn't cooperate, then it would be absolutely impossible for him to succeed. In order to cooperate with the Dream Dao Law, he had to communicate with the other party. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he walked over to the Dream Dao Law and grinned. Let's have a chat. The Dream Dao didn't respond. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, what are your conditions? Tell me. The Dao Law still didn't respond. Yi Xian was about to speak when the voice of the god on the second floor resounded again. Don't waste your energy. It doesn't take a liking to you at all. Not to mention it, even the Dao Law and Spatial Dao Law won't take a liking to you at all. Yi Xian's face darkened. I'm not that bad, right? The god on the second floor said indifferently, don't doubt it. You're very weak now. Yi Xian grunted coldly. God on the second floor, were you as formidable as I am when you were as young as I am now? The god on the second floor fell silent. Yi Xian sneered. No. At this moment, the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly sounded. When I was as old as you, I was already invincible in my world. Now, you aren't even comparable to the guy locked up in the first floor. If he didn't comprehend a trace of the true meaning of Sword Dao, he wouldn't even be qualified to be locked up in the first floor. True meaning of Sword Dao? Yi Xian frowned. What's that? The god on the second floor said indifferently, if you comprehend the true meaning of Sword Dao, you will be considered to have broken through to the level of Sword Immortal. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, how do I comprehend it? The god on the second floor said angrily, who should I ask? I'm not a swordsman. Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Yi Xian had left the prison pagoda. Yi Xian opened the door. It was Xiao Gu. Xiao Gu smiled. We're here. Yi Xian nodded. Let's go. With that, he and Xiao Gu came to the deck of the Nebula warship. On the deck, Yi Xian looked up. Below there was an endless mountain range. Between these mountains there was a white fog. At a glance it was like a fairyland. Yi Xian said softly, "It's so quiet." Beside Yi Xian, Xiaogu said in a low voice, "It's very quiet. This place is a bit strange. We have to be careful." Yi Xian nodded. He glanced around and finally he looked to the right. Dozens of miles away there was a mountain. The mountain was a bit strange. It was like a circular palace. It was very strange. Xiaogu also looked at the mountain. "This mountain is a bit strange. Let's go take a look?" Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Let's go." With that he, Xiaogu and the others got off the nebula warship and went straight to the mountain. In next to no time they arrived at the foot of the mountain. At this moment they discovered that the mountain was floating. It was over 30 meters above the ground. Not only that, there were some stone pillars around the bottom of the mountain. The stone pillars were painted with all sorts of mysterious runes. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "There must have been people staying here in the past." At this point he looked at Xiaogu. "There used to be no small world in this area, right?" Xiaogu shook his head. "I don't know. I only know that this place suddenly appeared." At the side, Ming Kun said in a low voice, "It's a bit strange." At this moment an inner court student suddenly pointed not far away. Look. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw a closed door on the mountain wall not far away. They could enter. Everyone came to the door. It was very large and there were two ferocious beasts painted on both sides of the door. Yi Xian pointed at the two beasts. "Does anyone recognize them?" Xiaogu shook his head. "I haven't seen them before." Everyone looked at Ming Kun. Because Ming Kun had been to the heaven domain, he could be said to be very knowledgeable. Ming Kun stared at the two beasts for a long time and then shook his head. "I haven't seen them before." Xiaogu looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, do you want to go in?" Yi Xian said calmly, "We're already here. Do we still want to leave?" At this point he paused slightly. "Wait." As he said this, his mind sank into his body. "Second floor guru, is there danger inside?" Second floor guru said calmly, "I don't know." Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "How can you not know? You're so powerful. Get lost." Second floor guru suddenly flew into a rage. Yi Xian. After a while Yi Xian asked again, "Shaoling, is it dangerous inside?" "No." "Are you sure?" Are you sure or not?" "I'm not very sure either." Yi Xian. Chapter 384. On the spot Yi Xian's face darkened. This Shaoling was too unreliable. Yi Xian still wanted to ask, but the god on the second floor suddenly said, "Won't you know if it's dangerous if you go in yourself? What do you want to ask?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly, "I just want to be safe." The god on the second floor said, "You're afraid of death." Yi Xian smiled, "Who isn't afraid of death?" As he spoke he looked at the door in front of him. He thought for a moment and said, "Xiaogu, brother Ming Kun and I will go in. The rest of you stay outside and wait for our news." Hearing this, everyone looked at each other. Some of them wanted to say something, but Yi Xian said, "It's decided." Just like that he walked to the door and gave it a light push. Creak. The door was easily opened. It was dark inside the door. Yi Xian, Ming Kun and Xiaogu walked in. After entering, a cold and gloomy aura hit them in the face. The surroundings were dark and quiet. Yi Xian glanced around. At this moment they should be in a passage. "Brother Yi," Ming Kun suddenly said, "this place is not simple. We need to be careful." Yi Xian nodded. He didn't dare to be careless in this unfamiliar place. "Brother Yi, look." At this moment Xiaogu suddenly pointed at the wall beside them. "Look." Yi Xian and Ming Kun looked at the wall. On the wall there were murals. On the murals there were some beasts and some people. However, these people were tall and big, somewhat different from ordinary people. Huh. At this moment, a surprised voice suddenly came from the prison pagoda. It was the voice of the mysterious woman on the fourth floor. Yi Xian quickly asked, "Vicious Jian, oh no, Senior Jian, do you know what this is?" "Yes." The mysterious woman on the fourth floor said. Yi Xian asked, "What is it?" The mysterious woman on the fourth floor said, "I'm not telling you." Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Xian didn't ask any more questions, he just brought Ming Kun and Xiaogu forward. On the way, the mysterious woman on the fourth floor suddenly said, "This is a good place. You have to enjoy yourself." Yi Xian said calmly, "Are you trying to scare me?" Jian Zizai laughed and said, "You are so bold. Who would dare to scare you?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, Jane, you're vicious. Your objective should be to come out, and I'm not against you coming out. Why do you want to kill me over and over again? Why not? Jian Zizai said calmly, after being locked up for so long, don't you need to take revenge? Yi Xian said angrily, I'm not the one who locked you up. Why are you looking for me for revenge? Jian Zizai said, you are the tower master. Yi Xian said, it's not that I'm locking you up. You have to find the person who locked you up. Jian Zizai said calmly, you are the tower master. Yi Xian was so angry that he was speechless. Damn it, this woman is determined to cause trouble for me. Ignoring the woman, he continued to lead Xiao Gu and the others down. The deeper they went, the colder the surroundings became. The mountain walls around them were all covered with all kinds of murals. The three of them were also extremely vigilant, not daring to have the slightest bit of carelessness or contempt. About an hour later, the three of them stopped. Not far in front of them there was a stone door. On both sides of the stone door stood two stone statues holding spears. Yi Xian walked to the stone door. There were some strange words on the stone door. He had never seen these words before. Do you know what's written on it? Jian Zizai suddenly asked. Yi Xian said calmly, if you have something to fart about, hurry up and say it. Jian Zizai said with a smile, it's written on it. Trespassers will die. Do you still want to go in? Yi Xian said with a smile, you don't seem to want me to go in. Jian Zizai fell silent. Yi Xian placed his right hand on the stone door and gently pushed it. The door swung open, and when she saw what was inside, this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. At this time the expressions of Yi Xian and the others suddenly became serious. Inside the door there were many long coffins. These coffins were all made of unknown gold and iron. There were more than 30 coffins and each coffin had a lamp on it. This is... Xiao Gu, who was beside Yi Xian, frowned. All of them are coffins? At this time Ming Kuan suddenly pointed not far away. Look. Hearing the voice, Yi Xian and Lin Sanji looked over. Not far away from them there was a person sitting. This person was different from the average human. He was at least one generation older than the average human. His ears were big, his arms were thick, and his entire body was covered in those strange tattoos. Ming Kuan said in a deep voice, what exactly are these? Xiao Gu shook his head. I don't know. At this time the stone door behind the three of them suddenly closed. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the three of them changed greatly. In the distance, the person sitting on the chair suddenly raised his head and opened his eyes. His eyes were brown. He stared straight at Yi Xian and the others and said something that Yi Xian and the others could not understand at all. At this time Jian Zizai suddenly said, he said, those who enter will die. You will all die. Yi Xian was speechless. Not far away the person sitting on the chair suddenly stood up. The next moment, a powerful aura suddenly swept toward Yi Xian and the others. How terrifying! The expressions of Yi Xian and the others changed greatly. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Boom! The stone door directly collapsed. Run! Yi Xian and the others flew out. At this time, a giant hand suddenly grabbed them from behind at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. Xiao Gu and Ming Kuan also stopped. Yi Xian suddenly said, you guys go first. As he said this, he turned around and a sheathed sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The next moment, Yi Xian suddenly pulled out his sword and slashed. Buzz! The sound of a sword rang out. At the same time, the giant hand was blocked by Yi Xian's sword. Xiao Gu and Ming Kuan did not leave. The two of them stood beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, you guys go first. Xiao Gu smiled bitterly. Leaving like this is too disloyal. Ming Kuan nodded. You can't be so disloyal. Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but at this time the person on the chair appeared in front of them. The next moment, a huge fist directly blasted toward them. The expressions of the three of them changed greatly. The next moment the three of them attacked together. Boom! With the sound of an explosion, the three of them flew out and smashed heavily against the wall. On the ground, Yi Xian quickly stood up. At this moment his head was extremely heavy and his consciousness was slightly blurred. On the other hand, Xiao Gu and Ming Kuan directly fainted. So strong. Yi Xian knew that the mysterious person in front of him was not someone he could resist at this moment. At this moment, Jian Zizai's voice sounded again. Quickly activate this pagoda. Activate this pagoda and we can definitely defeat him. Activate the prison pagoda. Yi Xian's expression darkened. So this is what this woman is planning. At this moment the person in the distance was about to attack again. Yi Xian's expression changed. The next moment he opened his palm and a sword appeared in front of him. The moment this sword appeared, a powerful sword force instantly appeared in the field. The sword at the top of the pagoda. When he saw this sword, the person in the distance stopped. He looked at the sword in front of Yi Xian with a solemn and fearful gaze. After a moment he turned around and left. Yi Xian immediately heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Jian Zizai's voice suddenly sounded from within the pagoda. Idiot! Such stupidity, no wonder your clan was exterminated. Idiot! Idiot! Yi Xian ignored Jian Zizai, who was already a little crazy, and hurriedly left the passage with Xiao Gu and Ming Kuan. Outside. When Yi Xian brought the two of them out, he found that the people from the Xiu sect were confronting a group of people. There were also a dozen people on the other side. Yi Xian put Xiao Gu and Ming Kuan on the ground, then looked at Li Chuan, who was not far away. What's going on? This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. What's going on? Li Chuan said solemnly, these people are from the Ascendant Heaven sect. Ascendant Heaven sect. Yi Xian frowned. Among the experts who wanted to snatch the pagoda outside Dao Yi City last time was the Ascendant Heaven sect's sect leader Mo Yanshao. At this moment Li Chuan said again, they want to go in. Yi Xian smiled. It's fine, it's not like it's ours. Whoever wants to go in can go in. Li Chuan glanced at Yi Xian, who listened to Brother Yi. As he spoke, he retreated to the side. Yi Xian said, let's retreat first. Although he was curious about the inside of the mountain, he knew very well that with his current strength, if he went in again, it would be tantamount to suicide. Therefore he decided to retreat first. At this moment, an Ascendant Heaven sect disciple suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian and asked, what's inside? Yi Xian smiled. Your attitude is not good, I'm not telling you. Hearing this, the man's eyes narrowed slightly. In the next moment he suddenly slammed his palm towards Yi Xian. As this palm slammed out, a stream of water seemed to have decided to drown Yi Xian. Yi Xian was already prepared. The moment the man made his move, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! In front of everyone's eyes, the man who had attacked was directly sent flying. He was sent flying thousands of feet. Everyone here was stunned. Yi Xian walked over to the man with his sword in hand. At this moment the man was lying on the ground. His entire body was covered in cracks and blood was flowing incessantly from his mouth. Yi Xian pointed his sword at the man. Who gave you the courage to attack? The man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. If you want to kill me, then kill me. If you want to. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword suddenly stabbed downwards. The center of the man's forehead was pierced through by Yi Xian's sword. The disciples of the Ascendant Heaven sect were infuriated when they witnessed this scene, and they charged at Yi Xian. On the other hand, Li Chuan and the others who stood behind Yi Xian charged towards the disciples of the Ascendant Heaven sect as well. In an instant both sides entered into battle. Yi Xian was just about to attack when a voice suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. If I were you, I would run immediately. It was the voice of a god from the second floor. Yi Xian was just about to ask when Jian Zizai suddenly said, why run? There's no need to run. Everything will be fine. As if I'd believe you. Yi Xian cursed, and then he turned to look at Li Chuan and the others who were nearby. Stop fighting and run. Li Chuan was stunned, and then he said, Brother Yi, we can win. Yi Xian said, stop fighting. Hurry up and run. Get out of here. When he saw that Yi Xian didn't seem to be lying, Li Chuan hesitated for a moment, and then he hurriedly looked at the students from the Xiu school. Everyone run. Run quickly. Everyone was stunned when they heard Li Chuan, but they didn't think too much about it and hurriedly ran with Li Chuan. The disciples of the Ascendant Heaven sect were stunned when they saw Yi Xian and the others flee. They were terrified just like that. Yi Xian led everyone back to the nebula ship. He started the nebula ship immediately. The nebula ship was about to leave. However, at this moment the stone gate of the mountain in the distance suddenly opened. At the same time a man walked out. It was the person who had attacked the three of them in the passageway. After that person came out, he waved his right hand, and all the disciples of the Ascendant Heaven sect not far away were directly turned into ashes. Then the person raised his head and looked at the nebula warship, or more accurately at Zhou Xian. The other party was looking at him. At this moment the person raised his right hand and aimed at the nebula warship. Sensing this scene, Zhou Xian's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly jumped off the nebula warship and the person's hand lowered and aimed at him. Zhou Xian raised his hands. "I surrender." In the distance the person was stunned, and the next moment he lowered his right hand. P.S. If you sell a kidney, will it have a big impact? End of this chapter. Chapter 385. Surrender. Jian Zizai's voice suddenly sounded from within the prison pagoda. "Zhou Xian, are you still a man?" "Shut the hell up," Zhou Xian suddenly said angrily. "Jian is so vicious. Do you believe that I won't kill you first?" Jian Zizai sneered. "Come on, come to the 4th floor." The corners of Zhou Xian's mouth twitched slightly. Damn, this woman was really difficult to deal with. Because he was sure that he couldn't beat this woman right now. He didn't pay attention to this woman because the person in front of the stone door in the distance was walking towards him. Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "Guru on the 2nd floor, do you know the origin of this person?" The guru on the 2nd floor said indifferently, "I don't know." Zhou Xian smiled bitterly. At this moment the person had already walked in front of him. The person spread out his right hand and a huge picture appeared in front of Zhou Xian. On the picture was a woman in a plain dress and she held a sword in her right hand. Seeing this woman, Zhou Xian was stunned. Because this woman was the mysterious woman in the plain dress. In front of Zhou Xian, the person pointed at Zhou Xian and suddenly said, "Human, is that the sword in your hand?" He was speaking human language. Zhou Xian was a little hesitant because he wasn't sure what the relationship between the woman in the plain dress and the person in the plain dress was. Earlier, Jian Zizai had said that the person's clan had been exterminated. If this was done by the woman in the plain dress, then admitting it would be equivalent to courting death. At this moment the person suddenly took a step forward. "Answer me." His voice was deafening like a great bell. Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "Yes." He knew that he couldn't be complacent because the sword he had just taken out was the sword of the woman in the plain dress. Hearing Zhou Xian's words, the person put away the picture and said, "Come with me." After saying that, he turned around and left. Hearing this, Zhou Xian immediately felt relieved. It seemed that this mysterious clan was not destroyed by the woman in the plain dress. Otherwise he would really be doomed. Zhou Xian collected his thoughts and followed the tall man into the stone door once again. Soon the two of them arrived at the hall with dozens of coffins. The tall man sat on a chair and looked down at Zhou Xian. "What's your relationship with her?" Zhou Xian replied solemnly, "I'm a swordsman, she taught me sword Dao." The tall man stared at Zhou Xian for a long time. Finally, his expression softened. "Where is she now?" Zhou Xian shook his head. "I don't know either." As he spoke, he faced the tall man. "Senior, do you know her?" The tall man faintly nodded. "I do. Back then, when our clan was in great danger, it was her appearance that allowed our clan to retain a trace of its lineage. Without her, our clan would have completely disappeared from this world." Hearing this, Zhou Xian was a little curious. "She saved your clan?" In his impression, the woman in the plain dress didn't seem like someone who liked to do good deeds. Of course, the woman in the plain dress was very, very good to him. The tall man glanced at Zhou Xian. "Why are you here?" Zhou Xian spoke solemnly. "This miniature world just happened to appear here, so my friend and I wanted to take a look." The tall man frowned. "Where is this place?" Zhou Xian was slightly astounded. "Senior, you don't know where this place is?" The tall man shook his head. "I was in a deep slumber before this, and it was your arrival that woke me up." Zhou Xian spoke solemnly. "Senior, you weren't here before this?" The tall man frowned. He raised his head and glanced at the surroundings. After a short while, his frown deepened. "So, the formation has disappeared." "The formation has disappeared?" Zhou Xian laughed bitterly. "Senior, can you explain it a little more clearly?" The tall man glanced at Zhou Xian. "In order to protect ourselves, my clan utilized a grand formation to conceal this entire world, and then it drifted through the boundless starry sky. Now it should have drifted to your starry sky. Now that the formation has shattered, it should have alarmed the experts of your starry sky. Yi Xian spoke solemnly. Senior, what do you plan to do next? The tall man fell silent for a moment before he said, now that the grand formation is gone, it'll be very dangerous for us to continue drifting about. Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Senior, if you intend to stay in this starry sky, then you'll probably encounter a great deal of trouble. Presently, practically all the powers of the Northern Territory had their eyes on this miniature world. So, it could be said that the tall man would definitely encounter a great deal of trouble if he wanted to stay here. The tall man spoke indifferently. It's fine. I'll just have to kill some people and gain a foothold again. Yi Xian was speechless. The tall man spoke abruptly. This world used to be the territory of my clan. There used to be a sect in the north and it was the swordsman sect. He came here all those years ago with the purpose of going to that sect. Now that sect has been destroyed. However, you can go and have a look. Perhaps you'll be pleasantly surprised. The north. Yi Xian bowed slightly. Thank you. The tall man nodded. There are some outsiders in this world and some of them aren't weak. I need to recuperate for now, so I can't fight too much. You have to be careful. You can come here if you encounter any danger. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Thank you. Take care, senior. With that he left. In the hall, the tall man took out the portrait of the woman in a plain dress once more, and he fell into deep thought as he gazed at the woman in the portrait. All those years ago, it was this woman who had saved his clan with a casual slash of her sword. It was just a casual slash of her sword. After Yi Xian left the belly of the mountain, he headed straight north. He was naturally curious about the place where the woman in a plain dress had once been. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian sank his mind into his body and sneered. Vicious Jian, I've turned danger into safety again. Are you angry? Jian Zizai did not answer. Yi Xian continued, Vicious Jian, you'll suffer retribution in the future for being so bad. Jian Zizai suddenly said, Come in and hit me if you have the ability. Come in. Yi Xian smiled coldly. I'm not going in. Jian Zizai said calmly, I don't believe that the Great Path's luck will always be with you. Yi Xian chuckled. My luck is good. I'm going to piss you off. The current him was very unhappy with Jian Zizai. This woman was always trying to harm him. He really couldn't beat her. Otherwise he would definitely go in and beat this guy to death. Jian Zizai did not speak to Yi Xian anymore because she realized that this person was despicable. She could not gain any advantage verbally. Yi Xian did not continue to tangle with Jian Zizai. He sped up. Along the way he saw some abandoned ruins. Obviously this small world did not only have the tall man's clan, but also some other creatures. Unfortunately it seemed that they were all gone. Just like that, after about an hour Yi Xian stopped. A few hundred feet in front of him, there was a giant sword floating in the air. The sword was at least 100 feet long and was floating upside down. Below the sword was a huge round platform, and on top of the round platform was a pile of ruins. Obviously this should be the swordsman sect that the tall man had mentioned. Yi Xian walked over. Along the way he saw some bones. It seemed that they had been dead for a long time. Not long after, Yi Xian arrived in front of a mountain gate. One side of the gate had collapsed. Among the collapsed rubble Yi Xian saw a plaque. On the plaque there were 2 words engraved. Sword Sect. Sword Sect? Yi Xian was silent for a moment before he continued forward. On both sides of him there were many bones. These bones were still holding swords in their hands. Obviously they had been fighting before they died. There must have been a fierce battle here. Yi Xian scanned the surroundings. Suddenly he walked quickly to a piece of broken rock. Beside the rock there was a corpse. This corpse was not a human corpse. It seemed to belong to some kind of demon beast. It was shaped like an insect and its body was somewhat large. It was also emitting a strange aura. Yi Xian was about to walk closer to take a closer look when the voice of the great god on the second floor suddenly sounded. Do you want to die? Yi Xian was slightly surprised. Why do you say that? The great god on the second floor said in a deep voice, that is emitting a poisonous aura. If you breathe it in, even if you don't die, you won't be able to keep your body. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. It can't be that scary, right? The great god on the second floor sneered. Not that scary. If it weren't for the chaos chi in your body, you would have died before you even got close to this place. Speaking of this, the great god on the second floor paused for a moment before continuing. This strange creature is a bit strange. It doesn't look like an ordinary demon beast. This sect should have been destroyed by these strange creatures. Xian said in a deep voice. You haven't seen it, great god on the second floor? The great god on the second floor said, no. But the guy on the fourth floor should have seen it. What? Xian was puzzled. Because she is a bit special. The great god on the second floor said, if you can build a good relationship with her, there will be endless benefits. Xian said indifferently, you saw it too. It's not that I want to be enemies with her, but she tried to kill me time and time again. Build a good relationship with her? Anyway, I don't have any hope. The great god on the second floor said, that's your business. I'm just giving a suggestion. Xian said in a deep voice, how is she special? The great god on the second floor said, you will know in the future. It's meaningless to tell you now. The corner of Xian's mouth twitched slightly. He had said nothing for so long. Xian looked at the strange demon beast in front of him. The body of the demon beast was still exuding that strange aura. Xian thought for a moment and then said, great god on the second floor, can I collect this aura? The great god on the second floor said, you don't have anything to hold it. If there are more of these things, they can even destroy this world. What do you use to store them? Xian said, can I use the prison pagoda? No. The great god on the second floor said in a deep voice, Xiaolinger is on the first floor. She can't resist this thing. At this point she paused and said, the third floor? Xian nodded. The great god on the second floor was silent for a moment and then said, you can try, but first use the chaotic energy to protect yourself. Xian nodded and then urged the chaotic energy. Then he carefully put the strange demon beast's body into the third floor of the prison pagoda. This thing might be of great use in the future. Xian continued to move forward. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, he suddenly froze and stopped. Not far in front of him there was a statue of a man. The man held a sword and looked forward. On his shoulder was a little guy leaning on his head. Chapter 386. Seeing this statue, Xian was stunned. Because this statue was exactly the same as the person who taught him the sword drawing technique. Could it be that this person was the one who founded the sword sect? Xian walked up to the statue. Below the statue there was a line of words. Unfortunately, it was already blurred and he couldn't make out what was written. At this time, Xiaolinger suddenly flew out. Xian looked at Xiaolinger, but Xiaolinger raised her head to look at the little fellow on the statue's shoulder. Looking at the little fellow, Xiaolinger's eyes were filled with curiosity. What's wrong? Xian asked softly. Xiaolinger looked at the little fellow for a long time. Finally, she grinned and turned around to return to the prison pagoda. Xian was about to leave when the sword at the top of the pagoda suddenly trembled. Xian stopped and looked at the statue in front of him. He knew that the owner of this statue was the owner of the sword in the pagoda. Xian was suddenly curious. He was curious about the owner of the other sword because he had seen the owners of the sword in the middle and the rightmost swords. What kind of person was the owner of the leftmost sword? Without thinking too much, Xian turned around and left. These people were all peerless swordsmen. Their strength was beyond his scope of understanding. What he should be thinking about now was how to become stronger. Xian continued walking. Along the way there were corpses everywhere. Soon he came to a dilapidated hall. The hall was covered in a thick layer of dust, and there was an unpleasant moldy smell everywhere. At the front of the hall was a statue that looked exactly like the one outside. But this statue was clean and without a speck of dust. Xian walked in front of the statue. At this time he suddenly turned his head. On his right, a hunchbacked old man was looking at him. There was a living person. Xian was shocked and his left hand gripped his sword tightly. The hunchbacked old man glanced at Xian, then walked up to the statue. He bowed deeply, then took out a piece of cloth and started wiping the statue. Xian said softly, "Senior?" The hunchbacked old man asked, "Are you a swordsman?" Xian nodded. The hunchbacked elder stopped and turned to look at Xian. "It's been many years since anyone came here." Xian said in a low voice, "Senior, what exactly happened here?" The hunchbacked old man said softly, "Haven't you already seen the results?" Xian looked at the statue. He was so powerful, so why did his sect end up like this? The hunchbacked old man suddenly sneered. If he was here, would my sect have fallen to such a state? Zhou Xian asked in a deep voice. What do you mean? The hunchbacked old man said softly. I don't know where he went. Hearing this, Zhou Xian understood. The owner of this statue should have left this world a long time ago. That's right, if he was still here, this sect wouldn't have fallen to such a state. The hunchbacked old man suddenly looked at Zhou Xian. Young man, what are you here for? Zhou Xian said, to search for treasures. The hunchbacked old man was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect Zhou Xian to be so direct. He looked at Zhou Xian and then fell silent. Zhou Xian said, since senior is still here, then this junior will take his leave. Saying so, he turned and left. If there was no one here, he would have looked around to see if there were any treasures. But since someone was here, he could only give up. Just as Zhou Xian was about to leave, the hunchbacked old man suddenly said, wait. Zhou Xian, this chapter is not finished, please flip the page. He stopped and turned to look at the hunchbacked old man. The hunchbacked old man fell silent for a moment. In the next moment, he suddenly pointed with a finger, and a ray of sword light slashed towards Zhou Xian. Seeing this, Zhou Xian's expression changed slightly, and he didn't think too much about it. He drew his sword and slashed. Bang! The ray of sword light shattered. The hunchbacked old man looked at Zhou Xian in disbelief. You drew your sword just now. How do you know this sword technique? Zhou Xian said, a senior taught it to me. The hunchbacked old man stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. Is it him? Zhou Xian nodded. The hunchbacked old man looked at Zhou Xian for a long time. In the end he smiled. Heaven's will, it really is heaven's will. Zhou Xian was speechless. The hunchbacked old man looked at Zhou Xian. Follow me. Saying so, he turned and walked out. Zhou Xian didn't think too much about it and followed him. It didn't take long for Zhou Xian to arrive in front of a small river. The water was clear and there were countless fist-sized pebbles at the bottom of the river. Zhou Xian looked at the hunchbacked old man with a puzzled expression. The latter spoke softly. The river of sword intent is the place where the experts of my sword sect have comprehended. The sword intent of my sword sect's experts is gathered in the river. When he spoke up to this point, he looked at Zhou Xian. Do you understand? Zhou Xian nodded. I understand. Thank you, senior. At this point, he paused for a moment and asked, why? The hunchbacked old man said with a smile, since he passed down that sword skill to you, it proves that you're fated with my sword sect. Now the sword sect of our world has already declined. If no one inherits these things, then they'll really disappear completely. You have the right to inherit it. Zhou Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, no matter what, I thank you. The hunchbacked old man grinned and left. Zhou Xian walked over to the river and sat down cross-legged. It didn't take long for two types of sword intent to appear around him. Good and evil sword intent. As soon as they appeared, the river suddenly seethed. At the same time, countless sword intents surged towards Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian was stunned. What are they trying to do? Right at this moment, Zhou Xian was shocked because he noticed that the sword intents in the river were actually trying to devour his sword intent. Hostility. As soon as his sword intent appeared, the sword intents in the river clearly felt threatened. Zhou Xian was about to withdraw his sword intent, but his evil sword intent suddenly charged towards the river. It didn't take long for the evil sword intent to devour the sword intents in a frenzy. At the same time, the sword intents in the river were retaliating madly. They were fighting each other. Zhou Xian was dumbfounded. Soon Zhou Xian realized that the evil sword intent couldn't hold on any longer. There were too many sword intents in the tower and they were all very strong. Therefore the evil sword intent was having a hard time resisting. Fortunately, these sword intents were ownerless. Otherwise, the evil sword intent would probably be defeated in an instant. As if he thought of something, Zhou Xian suddenly grabbed a strand of the good sword intent and said angrily, why aren't you helping? Because from the beginning until now, the good sword intent had been watching from the side and had no intention of helping. This was too disloyal. After being scolded by Zhou Xian, the good sword intent hurriedly rushed over to help. After all, Zhou Xian was its master and it didn't dare to disobey him. After the good sword intent joined in, the situation gradually changed. However, the good and evil sword intent was still a little difficult because there were too many sword intents in the river. Zhou Xian seemed to have thought of something and quickly said, devour the weaker ones first, starting from the weakest. this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. After hearing Yi Xian's words, the good and evil sword intent began to devour the weaker sword intents. Just like that, 2 days passed and the number of sword intents in the river decreased. To Yi Xian's surprise, his 2 sword intents had become stronger after devouring those sword intents. Seeing this, Yi Xian was a little excited. Just like that, about 3 days later, there were only 2 sword intents left in the river. They were Yi Xian's good and evil sword intent. And now, after devouring countless sword intents, Yi Xian discovered that his sword intent was at least several times stronger than before. This discovery made Yi Xian overjoyed. Sword immortals were divided into small sword immortals and great sword immortals. And now he should be a great sword immortal. Now if he used the fairy spirit sword draw to determine life and death, and these 2 sword intents, ordinary origin realm experts wouldn't be able to resist him at all. At this moment the hunchbacked old man came in front of Yi Xian. The hunchbacked old man looked at Yi Xian and smiled. You should be a great sword immortal now, right? Yi Xian nodded. I should be. The hunchbacked old man said softly, this old man would like to ask for your help, young friend. Yi Xian said, Senior, please tell me. The hunchbacked old man looked around and said softly, young friend, if you meet someone who will teach you sword skills in the future, please tell him that the ones who destroyed the sword sect back then were the Saha tribe. This tribe is in the Saha Star region. Yi Xian nodded. If I meet them, I will definitely tell them this. The hunchbacked old man faintly smiled. During the war back then, all the valuables in the sect were taken away. However, there is still an item in the main hall. This item is called the Sword Courage Stone. It is very useful to you now, so you can take it. With that, his body gradually became illusory. Yi Xian was silent. Actually, he could tell from the beginning that the hunchbacked old man was a soul body, and only a strand of soul body. Strictly speaking, the old man was already dead. Soon, the hunchbacked old man completely disappeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian bowed slightly, then turned around and left. He came to the hall from before, and in the hall he found the Sword Courage Stone that the hunchbacked old man had mentioned. This Sword Courage Stone is only the size of a palm. It's just right for me. Yi Xian discovered that when he held the Sword Courage Stone, an extremely powerful sword intent suddenly surged out of the Sword Courage Stone and gathered on his arm. This sword intent was no weaker than his good and evil sword intent. Good stuff. Yi Xian was a little excited. With this Sword Courage Stone, it meant that his sword skills would be enhanced by 3 sword intents. Fight. Now he just wanted to find someone to fight with. As if he thought of something, he suddenly said, Vicious Jian, come out, let's fight one-on-one. Jian Zizai said calmly, come in. Yi Xian snorted coldly, come in then. Do you think I'm afraid of you? With that, he was about to go in, but at this moment the god on the 2nd floor suddenly appeared in front of him. Then the god on the 2nd floor slapped him on the head. Bang! Yi Xian flew out. Yi Xian was speechless. The god on the 2nd floor looked coldly at Yi Xian, who was on the ground in the distance. Go in? Are you a pig brain? If you go in, that woman can kill you with just a breath. Yi Xian was a little dissatisfied. Please, I'm also very strong now, okay? The god on the 2nd floor said calmly. Is that so? Then let me see how strong you are. After saying that, she disappeared directly. Yi Xian was a little confused. What did she mean? In the next moment his expression changed greatly and he suddenly turned around. An instant later he raised his hands. I surrender. End of this chapter. Chapter 387. In front of Yi Xian was an ugly exotic beast. This exotic beast was exactly the same as the corpse of the exotic beast on the 3rd floor of the prison pagoda. One had to know that even the 2nd floor guru was extremely fearful of the exotic beast that was already a corpse. Now there was a living one in front of him. How could he not be fearful? The exotic beast stared at Yi Xian. Its eyeballs were spinning. It was a very strange sight. However, it did not make a move. Yi Xian slowly retreated. With every step he took, the exotic beast would take a step forward. Yi Xian had no choice but to stop. Yi Xian said in a low voice, What are you going to do? At this time, the exotic beast's gaze suddenly fell on Yi Xian's abdomen. In the next moment, it charged directly at Yi Xian. An extremely strange aura was emitting from its body. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression changed. He turned and ran. Yi Xian's speed was very fast. However, the exotic beast's speed was not slow either. It kept chasing after Yi Xian. Gradually, Yi Xian realized that if he continued to run like this, the exotic beast would catch up to him sooner or later. Because the exotic beast's speed seemed to be a little faster than his. Yi Xian stopped. He turned and drew his sword and slashed. The sword in his hand was the immortal spirit sword. The sword slashed down. Boom. The exotic beast was instantly sent flying hundreds of feet away. However, Yi Xian's expression was incomparably solemn. Because the exotic beast seemed to be completely fine after taking a blow from his sword. How could it be so terrifying? In the distance, the exotic beast roared at Yi Xian. Then it charged at Yi Xian again. Yi Xian turned and ran. As he ran, Yi Xian hurriedly asked in his heart, "Second floor guru, why is this fellow chasing after me so relentlessly?" Second floor guru said calmly, "Don't you think you're very powerful? Hit him." Yi Xian was speechless. The distance between man and beast was getting shorter and shorter. Yi Xian's face darkened. If this continued, he would be caught sooner or later. He couldn't beat him in a fight, nor could he outrun him. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly changed his direction. To that round mountain. Now he could only go to the round mountain to look for the tall man, because the other party had said that he could look for him if there was any danger. Him. At this moment, the exotic beast behind him roared as if it had gone mad. At the same time it sped up a lot. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. He quickly stopped, turned around, drew his sword and slashed down. That strange beast did not dodge and directly crashed into Yi Xian's sword. Boom. The strange beast was instantly sent flying, and Yi Xian himself also retreated rapidly. This time he retreated more than 1,000 feet. After he stopped, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was seriously injured. That blow just now had directly damaged his entire body, including his 5 internal organs. Not only that, but there was also a strange aura that was entangled around his body, constantly eroding him. Fortunately, he had the chaotic qi to resist, or he would have been dead. Yi Xian found that the chaotic qi could only barely resist that strange aura. In the distance, the strange beast was still unharmed. Not only that, but it was even more manic. Soon the strange beast chased after Yi Xian again. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched and he turned to run. At this moment he realized that he really couldn't beat the other party. If he used the prison pagoda, he might be able to give it a try. However, once he used the prison pagoda, it would be even more troublesome because that Jian Zizai in the pagoda would definitely be more troublesome than this guy in front of him. Now he could only go to that round mountain as soon as possible to find the tall man. Yi Xian sped up, and it didn't take long for him to arrive before a dense forest. However, he just arrived before the forest when he suddenly stopped. Because he noticed that the strange beast behind him had stopped first. Yi Xian turned around to look at the strange beast. The strange beast was looking at the forest behind him and there was fear in its eyes. Fear. Yi Xian's face sank. "There's something in the forest behind me." He turned around and glanced at the forest before him. The trees were very large, very long, and they were all crooked and twisted. The entire forest seemed like a ball of string that had been knotted. It was slightly strange. Yi Xian didn't dare advance any further. Since he'd arrived at this minor world, he'd noticed that nothing here was so simple and he had to be careful. When it saw Yi Xian stop, the strange beast in the distance roared furiously at Yi Xian, and this roar caused the ground beneath Yi Xian's feet to crack apart. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched slightly. This guy was really strong. However, the strange beast still didn't dare to approach. Seeing this, Yi Xian walked to the side, preparing to slip away, but the strange beast followed him closely. Yi Xian's face sank. This guy wasn't going to give up. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Second floor guru, is there anything wrong with the forest behind me?" The second floor guru said indifferently, "Won't you know once you go in?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly, "Senior, this place is very strange. I'm afraid I won't be able to come out if I go in." The second floor guru said, "You solve it yourself." After that, the second floor was completely silent. Yi Xian. Just like that, the man and the beast were in a stalemate for about an hour. At this time the sky turned dark. There was silence all around. Yi Xian's scalp was a little numb. Originally, he naturally wasn't afraid of the night, but the situation was different now. There was this strange beast in front of him and there was a strange forest behind him. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't panicking. At this time, a subtle sound suddenly came from the forest behind Zhou Xian. This sound was similar to the sound of footsteps, like the sound of feet stepping on leaves. Hearing this sound, Zhou Xian's face changed, and the strange beast opposite him slowly retreated. Something's up. Zhou Xian also retreated, and as he retreated, the strange beast stopped. It stared at Zhou Xian and its body kept wriggling on the ground, causing the whole ground to tremble. Obviously it wanted to block Zhou Xian. Seeing this scene, Zhou Xian's face sank, and the next moment he directly rushed towards the strange beast. Damn, he couldn't stand this. If he were to die, he had to drag the strange beast down with him. At the moment when Zhou Xian suddenly rushed out, the strange beast opposite him suddenly let out a strange cry, then turned around and ran. However, before it could run a few steps, it suddenly fell to the ground. Zhou Xian was stunned. Be careful. At this time the second-floor guru's voice suddenly sounded. Zhou Xian said in a deep voice, "What's going on?" The second-floor guru didn't respond. Zhou Xian didn't ask anymore. He walked to the strange beast's corpse. At this moment the strange beast was still alive and its body was still wriggling. And Zhou Xian noticed that there was a wound on the strange beast's throat. Something was making a move on this strange beast. And he saw nothing. Without a doubt, that unknown existence was definitely not something he could fight against. Zhou Xian didn't even think about it and directly ran away. And as soon as he took a step, the strange beast's corpse behind him disappeared. At the same time, a blurry black shadow suddenly flashed in front of him, accompanied by a strange laugh. Zhou Xian stopped and he glanced around coldly. There was nothing around him. And he knew that the unknown thing was around him. Even that strange beast could be killed in an instant. Obviously, the other party's strength was far beyond his. Facing such an existence, he couldn't use force, he could only use his wits. Zhou Xian didn't speak. He waved his right hand and a sword suddenly appeared in front of him. The sword at the top of the tower. When this sword appeared, a powerful sword aura immediately appeared in the surroundings. Can you change your move? At this time, Jian Zizai's voice suddenly sounded. Is it interesting to use this move to scare me? Zhou Xian said coldly, it's none of your business. Jian Zizai is vicious. Let me tell you, if I die, I will definitely detonate the prison tower before I die and die with you. Jian Zizai sneered, detonate this tower? You think too highly of yourself. Zhou Xian didn't pay attention to this woman. He looked around and it was very quiet. Zhou Xian thought for a moment, then put away the sword, turned around and ran. But soon he found that no matter how he ran, he was still in the same place. Seeing this, Zhou Xian's face darkened. The other party was not going to let him go. Zhou Xian said in a deep voice, Senior, can you come out for a chat? There was no response. Zhou Xian didn't say anything. He sat cross-legged on the ground and waited. The other party didn't kill him from the number 1 family. Obviously, the other party didn't want to kill him yet. Since they didn't want to kill him, the other party must have some purpose. Time passed bit by bit, and just as dawn was about to break, a blurry figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Zhou Xian couldn't see the other party's true appearance at all. The blurry figure suddenly moved and soon, a woman made of energy appeared in front of Zhou Xian. This woman was none other than the woman in the plain dress. Seeing this scene, Zhou Xian was stunned. It was the woman in the plain dress again. Could it be that the woman in the plain dress had some sort of relationship with this guy? The blurry figure suddenly pointed at Zhou Xian, and then at the woman in the plain dress. Obviously, it was asking Zhou Xian if he knew the woman in the plain dress. Zhou Xian hurriedly said, I know her, I'm very familiar with her, very familiar. At this moment, the blurry figure suddenly disappeared. The next moment, Zhou Xian's expression changed drastically. He drew his sword and slashed forward. With this slash, a sword light directly tore through space. A sword strike with all his strength. However, as soon as Zhou Xian's sword slashed down, his entire body flew backward. This time he flew directly back into the dense forest and finally landed heavily on a tree. At the same time, branches directly wrapped around him. Zhou Xian's mind was a little confused. What was going on? At this moment, Jian Zizai's voice suddenly sounded in the prison pagoda. This time you're finished. Outside the prison pagoda, the blurry figure appeared not far in front of Zhou Xian. He moved slightly and the next moment, A somewhat low voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Where is she? Yi Xian said in a low voice. Why are you looking for her? A voice that sounded like the roar of a wild beast suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. I'm going to tear her into 1,000 pieces. It's over. Yi Xian's face turned pale. So this guy had a grudge against the woman in the plain dress. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.